forward to learning tonight. So we appreciate that you would come here. My name is Craig Christensen. I'm the Executive Director of the Conserve Valley, and along with Representative Stratton, delighted to welcome you here this evening. Now, one of the things we'd like to do is we've got a lot to cover, and we can stay here till about 2 in the morning. Is everyone good with that? Then we better do something else. We've got one person here till 2. All right, cleanup's going to take a while. Here's what we're going to do. We'd actually like to involve all of you throughout the presentations. But the way that we're going to do that, instead of giving the microphone to people, we're going to ask you to weigh in on questions. So if you take out your cameras, use the QR code, and if you bring up this, the Slido website, it's going to give you the opportunity to weigh in on a question. Now, we're just running some water through the pipes here to make sure this works. So if you bring up, has everyone got the QR code? All right. Now, there's a poll question. Wonderful. There's a poll question. Why don't we go ahead and hit the poll? What's your perception of Utah Lake? Now, again, it could be anything from very positive to very negative based on your experience. Would you just hit the poll, and it will give us an instant tally here. You can do this online if you're online. We're live streaming this as well, or you can go ahead and do it. So if everyone would just answer, we've got a number of people answering. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be asking some questions as we go through tonight, and we're also going to give you the chance to weigh in. The other thing that you're going to want to do is, as we talk, as the speakers talk this evening, they're going to be, you might have questions. There's a section on here where you can go to the Q&A, and on the Q&A, you can ask questions. We're going to use your questions for the Q&A section. If you see a question that you like, you can upvote it, and it rises to the top. So the most popular questions from the group here tonight and online, those are the questions we'll ask during the Q&A. So this is our way of getting you involved in making sure that everyone is participating in the session tonight. If we gave everyone a chance to talk, that's the 2 o'clock in the morning version. If we do it this way, we should be wrapping up sometime around 8:30 or 9. All right. Now, let me, again, just thank you for joining us this evening, and let me introduce Representative Keven Stratton. Keven?
Thank you. So I've kind of been, last couple of weeks, I've been healing up. So you see this, let's just get this out. I was in Hawaii and on a wave, and I love water, you know, we love water, and it caught me, and I went head first, 5 bones in my back and neck are broken, but I'm still good. See, I'm still good here. I could make, you know, but we all love the power of water, but thank you. And so many familiar faces. Actually, I'm just grateful to speak here and see you. I was talking to Speaker Wilson earlier today. He sends his, we all do in the legislature. And we were talking for just minutes, you know, I had a young man, same thing.
If you,
been in the
yeah, anytime you bring
the
it down in the corner, you
just
turn off the hot
grateful for the miracle of life.
preferences.
It's been somewhat of a real defining experience for Laurie and I, my wife. So I just want to thank all of you. Let's give a round to, if we can, Conserve Utah Valley for the work and effort. All they've done to organize this, get this, help this together. What we want to do is we want to make sure as we move forward as a community, as a body, we have good information, data-driven, sound science that allows us to help Utah Lake be its best version. I think at this point, it really makes sense for us all to take deep breaths and allow the process to work. As a legislature, we're going to talk, first thing we do is we talk about things we try and put in good processes and resources to get the right thing done, to make sure that this lake, recognizing the growth that's going to take place and all that, it's very, I do have a bias. I would like to be able to catch fish like my great grandpa did with his grandsons and granddaughters. Hopefully we can get there. But thank you for your interest. Together we can do this. This is just a powerhouse gathering today. There's probably thousands of years of effort and experience, expertise in this group. So let's keep working together. So let's get started. We're going to invite the legislators up, please, and we'll begin with this panel. I'm going to turn the time to Adam Johnson, and maybe we can let's try and be on the same side. So we're not a divided bunch generally. We do see things differently from time to time. Yeah, let's maybe bring a few chairs over here. But one thing we are united on is helping this lake and help us do our very best. So Adam, here you go.
We'll leave those for you guys, and I can use this one.
Okay.
That's all right. Great. See. Sorry, guys, bear with me here for a second. If I snag that, I'll give it to you a sec. Yeah. Hello.
Camera, do you want us to stay seated or go?
We actually have the camera, so it'll adjust on you guys.
Okay.
Yep. Great. First off, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. Like Representative Stratton mentioned before, we just want to focus on educating today. That is our goal. And a lot has happened legislatively in this last session and in the past few years. And there's been a lot of misinformation or a lack of education surrounding the legislation of Utah Lake. And so, as Representative Stratton mentioned today, we want to ask our legislators who have so graciously been here today and given their time questions about Utah Lake, the legislation surrounding it. So I'll be asking a few questions along with Representative Stratton that we've prepared. And then, as mentioned before by Craig, we'll be able to have a question and answer from all of you. So if you have questions as we go through, feel free to use this QR code to send them. Yeah, for sure. So we're gonna go ahead and start by having our panelists introduce themselves. So I'll bring this microphone down here, and if you could start, that'd be great.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm Representative Martha. I represent everything south here and then west of State Street in Southwest Orem and Provo, and actually almost all of Utah Lake.
This is all your thing. Jeff Moss, I'm currently House District 2. I'll be 51. And I actually do love, because if you look across the lake, most of that side, at least going up that way, is my district. So Saratoga Springs up into Lehigh recently split from Eagle Mountain. That's my district.
Hello, thank you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to hear these presentations with you. My name is Nelson Abbott. I'm a representative from Orem, and we are sitting in my district right now. Basically, my district is University Parkway to Provo, up to center, and then comes out to the lake, including most of it. My name is Brady Brammer. I represent the Alpine Highland and Cedar Hills area. And I'm just thrilled to have this many people interested in the lake. We need a lot of people lifting and helping to solve some issues there.
Thank you. Great to see you all tonight. I'm Jeff Burton. I represent Spanish Fork, Salem, and Woodland Hills, just south of here. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate the input.
I'm Adam Robertson. I represent Provo. The area I represent, you can approximately think of it as BYU and a big circle around it. That's largely my district. I was so glad to have so many people out tonight.
Thank you, Adam. Before you ask your first question, I just want to talk about this legislative group in the legislature and those that represent this valley. We had every one of these individuals been involved in sponsoring the legislation we're going to talk about today. The co-sponsors, chief sponsors. The funding is a big deal. You'll hear about legislative funding. Absolutely historical, unprecedented amounts of attention and the fiscal muscle behind that beginning to do what needs to be done. So thanks, Adam. Just grateful to be here with these legislators, my colleagues, and all of them. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Thank you all. And can we just get a round of applause for our legislators for being here today? Great. So I'll go ahead with some questions. Feel free, anywhere from 1 to 3 legislators can respond to each of these questions. We don't want everybody to respond to each question, so we can get through a good amount of them. But we'd like to start by talking a little bit about funding. So the first question is, how much funding was allocated for Utah Lake restoration efforts in the last year? And what are the current plans for that funding?
I had the cheat sheet, so I got to do this. This year, actually, if you look at the session, was really the year of water, right? We've never really put the emphasis that we had this year at the legislative level. Last year, we did do $10 million. In fact, Brady, Representative Brammer here was the one that made the request, and we got $10 million. And that was a lot for us, for Utah Lake. And $5 million of it went to help with Wacara Way, and $5 million went to help with remediation. This year, we made a much more significant effort. Now, part of that was because we had federal funding. There was a lot of federal funding specifically tied to infrastructure and to water. If you look at the total that we put combined, it was almost $1 billion that we put into water. And when we look at water, we don't really look at it from a very narrow, just one geographical area. We look at the whole state because all of it impacts. So we look at one of the biggest things, water meters. And it's something that we do in my city, have done for a while. It's helped us to conserve about 20 to 30% of water. And it actually changed user behavior because you can track and see how much water you're using. That will help as we start to roll that out across the state. That's going to help all of our water, right, wherever you're at. I'll read a couple of the other things. Directly last year, we put in $30 million into Utah Lake that will go into helping around the area, some of the coming into the lake, remediating that water, helping to clean up the water that way. We actually, Brady's going to talk about his bill. His is the Utah Lake Authority. That received $1.5 million ongoing. Sometimes it's easier to get one-time money, right? If we'll have a good year surplus, but to get ongoing money is actually a pretty difficult thing to do. That tells you how much the legislature really believes that this is a state issue that we really should be trying to focus on this at a state level. So that was a big piece of what we did. In addition, as you probably know, with the Great Salt Lake, we have some serious concerns about that. And so part of it, we put $50 million into that and some ongoing as well, with the hope that that's also going to help as we're seeing that start to regain water in. That will also help us down the stream here at Utah Lake. Those are really the highlights. I would say there's a lot of other things that we're doing on a smaller scale, turf replacement, all these conservation efforts. Again, all of these things we think are really going to help benefit the lake here in Utah. So, that's the high level.
Great, thank you. Anyone else would like to respond to that before we move on to the next question?
Quickly say, in total, significant. One of the things that we did as legislative bodies, we looked at a lot of the money that's coming in. We recognized that we needed to spend these funds on legacy projects that are long term, that will make a difference over generations, with the stimulus. I'd also say for the last 10 years, we've been putting significant investment to help us get to where we are. These great agencies and members of the executive branch are talking about the Phragmites and carp mitigation and these things. This has been an ongoing funding for the several years. I would suspect that close to $50 million in the last 10 years has gone in the lake, and that's a significant commitment investment on what we're doing, and that's a result of us. Us meaning, I'm not saying us. It's us. Our commitment to that lake and water and being wise stewards. So.
Great. One follow-up question while we're on the topic of funding. For those of us that aren't as familiar with the distribution, how funds get distributed, what is the process for distributing the funding that's been put towards Utah Lake?
So it goes through an agency. So Division of Natural Resources is primarily where that's been distributed. That's where the first chunk of money went, Brady. We have agencies that are responsible, right? There needs to be an accountable agency that will help to administer that. And of course, they're working with a number of other agencies and groups to help facilitate, but it would go through the Division of Natural Resources primarily.
Great, thank you. Maybe shifting topics a little bit, we can talk a little bit about the Utah Lake Authority. So I wonder if we can get just a brief introduction for the folks that don't know what Utah Lake Authority is. And I also would like to ask, what will the Utah Lake Authority change for cities, the public, and the general management of the lake?
Sure. So the Utah Lake Authority is a state level entity
that has a local board. So in large impact. So it has 15 board members, 9 of which are local elected officials, meaning 7 from local cities, 2 are representatives or senators that are elected out of Utah County. And then 1 is a county commissioner. And then there's also another one that is from our Chamber of Commerce. And so if you think about it, we've all heard of the Inland Port Authority. Now that people, lose their minds about the Inland Port Authority, okay? That one, they took a local entity and they pulled out the jurisdiction and they said, this is now a state entity. In this instance, it's like the inverse of that. So instead of taking a local entity, they took a state level asset, which is Utah Lake, and they said, we're going to allow for an increase in local control over that asset. So they took a state asset and added local control into it. And then in the past, it was kind of there were a lot of different groups involved in the lake. Many of them are still involved, but what the Utah Lake Authority is, it's what's called an overlay authority, meaning the state agencies still act in the same roles that they were acting before, but the Utah Lake Authority allows for some additional local decision making. Now, some things that they can do that could not be done with the Lake Commission. So the authority takes the place of the Utah Lake Commission. The authority has the ability to go out and get grants and programs in its own name, instead of the Lake Commission would have to do that through other entities that were not the Lake Commission. The Lake Commission was just it was an interlocal agreement. So it's like multiple governments forming kind of a loose agreement. The funding source for the Lake Authority is significantly better than what the Lake Commission has. So the Lake Commission was primarily to do some projects to improve the lake, but they had to be funded by these agencies that were members. And so you were taking the funds out of our local economies or out of our local tax base to fund projects on a state asset. The Lake Authority, by contrast, no longer asks for those funds from the local entities. Instead, it asks for those funds from the state. The Lake Commission was they received between $400,000 and $500,000 per year to run their programs. The Utah Lake Authority will receive $1.5 million per year to run their programs. So we're about 3 times more than we used to have through the Lake Commission. So that's kind of the bigger idea. And in terms of how the changes for this. So previously on the Lake Commission, there were members really there because of water rights. They were trying to protect their water right interests. So what we did was we said on the Lake Authority, we're going to say the Lake Authority can't mess with your water rights, but that means that you are off the board. Your water rights are protected by statute. Get off the board. We want the local entities to be able to interact with the lake in a way that is, as long as it doesn't protect water rights. And so the cities around the lake, there are 7 cities that will have representation. It's a 15-member board, will have a whole lot more say than they've had previously on the Lake Commission. And a lot of this was because the Lake Commission could talk about some things, but there wasn't as much of a local participation effort. And this should involve a lot more local effort into seeing what's going on and transparency. It has much greater transparency rules. So anytime they're having a board meeting, they have to abide by not only the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act, but they also have a new feature, which is if you're interested in hearing what they're doing, you can ask to be put on their email list, and they are statutorily required to let you know before anything happens that they are having a meeting and what it's about. Okay, so that's a new element that hasn't been put into our previous entities. So that's kind of a rough basis for it, but it does provide for, they would still have to get permitting in the same way that any entity would on the lake. However, they have a little more ability to choose what they're going to apply for permitting for, with some priorities in that way.
Great, thank you. Would anybody like to add anything there? Great, at the end.
No, just really quickly, I just want to say, I received a lot of emails that were very concerned about Representative Brammer's bill, and he worked so hard with so many stakeholders, and one of the things that happens with the bill is the way that it starts is almost never the way that it ends up. And we get a lot of input, and I just want to commend Representative Brammer for really putting in so much effort and time and listening and taking so many things into consideration. A lot of people thought that this bill would just, usher in islands in the lake, and he made sure, but it's crazy because people don't believe legislators all the time. I don't know why. But anyway, just really made very clear that that's not what this bill can do at all. It has nothing to do with that. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that he worked really, really hard on this bill and put in a lot of time and effort, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Thanks. A follow-up question regarding the Utah Lake Authority. What will be the timeline for implementing the ULA?
So it has to be funded first, and our fiscal year starts in July of 2022. And so it will be funded in July of 2022. That means that once that happens, they can be assigned. For example, one of the key things is an attorney from the state attorney general's office to come up with bylaws and procedures that they would follow, in their voting procedures and everything that way. And so that's one of the, so starting in July 22 is when it gets started. A lot of the appointments need to be done by, I think like June something this year. And so once those appointments to the board are made by the various cities, the legislative appointments have already been made. It's myself and Senator McKell. And then we have the governor's appointments that I haven't seen yet. All of that will get going. And the first meeting I suspect will be in July, and then it'll start to operate. And these things don't just like start off at a sprint. It takes a little bit to get everything set up, and then it'll build over time.
Just one point I'd like to make is we recognize clearly that the Utah Lake belongs to the citizens of Utah. And every decision we make is based on that. I think I can say that for everybody up here. We recognize it. The reason I support this bill is I think it will add to the transparency. There won't be any fly-by-night in the cover of darkness decisions being made on Utah Lake without public hearing and discussion from people, input from the citizens that own the lake.
All right, thank you. Another follow-up question. I think that's something a lot of us have thought about is how can the public and groups be involved in this transition process as the Utah Lake Authority is implemented?
I could talk about that one. So as I look out here, I recognize some of you. We had a meeting here at UVU before the legislative session started, and a lot of you were here. And then during the session, a lot of you came up and did a little rally on the steps of the Capitol building. And I got a lot of emails and question. I think you guys kind of already know a little bit because you're already doing it. So I think that type of activity, I appreciated it because it brought awareness to the issue. I think all of us from Utah County were really concerned about Utah Lake, but it brought awareness, maybe heightened awareness to even us about what was going on with the lake, but also to the legislature statewide. So I think to answer the question, how do you get involved and have your voice heard? Like Representative Brammer was saying with this Utah Lake Authority, get on the email list, show up to meetings, talk to the people on the board about your concerns about what's going on, and then just reach out to your legislator and let us know, your thoughts, because we want to hear from you and be educated by you and find out what's going on. Not what's going on, but what your opinions are and what we need to be aware of, things that we might not recognize or appreciate enough. So.
Great, thank you. I'd like to shift gears a little bit again and talk about the amendments that happened to HB 272. So I wonder if someone would be willing to give us an overview of this bill that was passed and what it does.
I'll take that. Appreciate the good work in 2018 by our, at that time, Senator Henderson and Representative McKell put in place a process potentially that if certain parameters were met, that the agencies could consider divesting some land in Utah Lake to help pay for the mitigation that needs to take place. I think we all agree that the Utah Lake needs mitigation, and in time, I think we can all agree that we need good science and data on whatever is done. The question is, how are you going to pay for it? And at that time, we've talked about $50 million of resources over the last 10 years. This is a big challenge that we need to face, recognize there's a multi that's going to require in terms of investment as we go forward to get it into its best place. And so House Bill 240 was an effort to take the language of that 2018 piece of legislation and flesh it out. There were three prongs that we needed to strengthen as we went along. Number one, there is a list of various criteria, but that criteria needs to have further definition. And so we added a paragraph that in addition to the 12 or 13 criteria that are there dealing with water quality and a vision of what the lake would potentially look like, we added another anything else that may come along as we go through this process. Additional criteria could be added. Another prong, we dealt with whatever we do, we've got to make sure that we have good fiscal stewardship and sustainability in what we're doing. And so we added a requirement there that whatever is done, it's fiscally sound. And the third prong dealt with the legality. The lake bed has been determined to be part of our state sovereign lands, and it's under the public trust doctrine. And there's specific legal requirements as we deal with that. Public trust doctrine goes back to Roman law, actually. It's a thread, as we look at our founding fathers, they drew from all sorts of different sources through time. This is one of those that we talk about in order, whatever is done, that there's very specific and heightened criteria that are required, whatever's done. And so we need to make sure that if a course is chosen, that threshold is met. So those are the three primary things. It added the opportunity for whatever is done is to be heard by the whole legislative body, signed by the governor. So there's an enhanced and strengthened transparency and process as well. So that would be the cornerstones of that legislation. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'll add one thing real briefly. I think it's really important note on process. The underlying bill was passed years ago. And then I think you'll find the Utah legislature was pretty agile compared to like the federal government in terms of it takes a lot to pass an act of Congress. We find that often we'll pass a bill and then we'll learn something new, unintended consequences, things we need to modify and change, things we need to improve. And I think that as a body, the legislature is pretty responsive to the people, and we're anxious to make things better. And we're not afraid to go in and fix things, change things, modify and make them better.
Thank you. And we appreciate your responsiveness. Thank you for that. Real quickly, I'm going to dive into questions from the audience soon. So pull out your phones. If you have any questions, feel free to keep sending those in or voting for them. I do have one more question though, before we get to that concerning these amendments. I'm just curious to hear from all of you what questions or concerns you heard from constituents or other lawmakers as you were going through the process of passing this amendments bill. What came up?
I think the big thing I heard is transparency. We want to make sure that citizens have input and nothing happens in secret. Part of this bill, and that one of the prongs that Kevin talked about was that no contracts can be entered into do any on the lake unless it goes through the CNR, correct? Eventually, I mean, that's the organization. So the state government is involved in any process that someone might want to enter into on the lake. So transparency, that was one. And then the other one I heard a lot about was anything we do that creates a long-term taxpayer burden is a concern. And we want to be able to talk about that as well. And so that's been foremost in my mind as we've gone through this process. Anybody else?
Yeah, I heard a lot about science, right? And really looking at what is truly best for Utah Lake. You know, when you talk about dredging or this or that, is that really the best thing to do for the lake? And consider really talk to the people who know and to listen to them.
I can weigh in a little bit too. I heard a lot of people that, basically the story was they love Utah Lake for its recreation, for the beauty, for the resource that it is, for the wildlife that it, they can observe or look at or even fish or whatever. And they're really, really concerned about things that we might do that might have a detrimental environmental impact on the lake. And I share that concern. I think that's something all of us share. If we do anything with the lake, we need to be really careful to make sure that it improves the lake and doesn't make it worse, right? And that's what I heard from a lot of constituents is, I think universally throughout Utah, though maybe university is too strong of a word, but almost university people are really concerned about protecting the environment of the lake. That's one of the things I think. I think the amendment to HB 272 tried to address was making sure that we really protect this resource that we have.
So I sent polling to about 18,000 email addresses. And I got somewhere around 1,300 responses back, which is a pretty good sample size. Most presidential sample pollings are about 1,100. So, this is a good subsection. And what we saw was that people care deeply about the lake, but we have 45% of the residents of Utah County that have not had an interaction with the lake in the last 5 years. It's right there. It's literally, behind us. It's not hard to get to. We are on its doorstep, and we have 45% of the citizens of Utah County that have no interaction with the lake in the last 5 years. And we have, but we had about 72% said that they would be willing to pay $2 or more per month for improvements to Utah Lake. And what we learned from that is that people aren't interacting with the lake as much as they could, but they see that it could be better, that there are some problems. And a lot of those problems have been caused by us. The carp introduction into the lake was just devastating to the ecosystem of that lake. But we see that the people of Utah County care deeply about it, that they want to do something about it, and that it can be better. They see potential, but they also want to make sure that nothing that happens with it is going to make it worse. It's not that it's without value right now, it's that it could be better, and they want to be careful about how we make it so.
Our lake is a very complex issue. So I hear in my lake, from the cities, the mayors wanting to engage elected officials. Without question, we do agree that Utah Lake right now is its best version, and it does need to be. We need to give it attention. We need to have some remediation done and some improvement done. And it's a key part of our future. We are literally, this is such a beautiful, look at the view out there. We're going to double in population in the next 30 years. And Utah Lake's going to be right at the heart of our valley and what we're doing. Recreation, a desire for better recreation is something that I heard a lot about. Certainly protecting water rights, but understand that a piece of legislation, as we work together as a community, the legislative body, we really do try and listen. And each one of those points, the legality issue, the fiscally sound issue, more meat and understanding what the parameters were, better process, all came from input, and hearing the concerns. We are awake now. That's a wonderful thing. We're awake. We see what's going on. We want to have an opportunity to see what can be done there and work together. So that's a lot of that. And frankly, I saw very what would I say, alienated almost parties begin to come together and dialogue, and that's always a positive thing when we get that taking place. So thank you.
Great, thank you. We're going to now move to some questions from the audience. So I have here pulled up a few. I'd like to start with this one. How is the Timpanogos tribe being represented in these decisions being made at Utah Lake?
So one of the amendments that we had was that the lake has a duty to take into account the historical and Native American history within the lake. And we worked with Mary Meyer, who is the CEO of the Timpanogos tribe, to develop that. And we've already kind of reached out to her to let her know that we would like her to serve on some of the technical committees and to help us locate the areas of high concern for the cultural artifacts that exist around the lake related to the Timpanogos tribe. Additionally, we're in the process of having a building that would serve as a historic for a lot of the Native American artifacts that have already been found, as well as identifying locations of existing artifacts that would stay in their place. Now, the board has not fully been formed, and so how everything works is not totally certain, but we amended the bill to specifically include Native American considerations in how the board operates, particularly the Timpanogos tribe. And one of the things that I will be encouraging in the future is I'd like us to get a little bit of momentum on improvement of the lake, but the original name of the lake was Lake Timpanogos. And a lot of people don't know that, but as we start to get momentum, I would love to make an effort to change the name of the lake to return it back to being called Lake Timpanogos, which I think that's what it should be called. I think we already have a state called Utah Lake. The Timpanogos tribe is not friendly with the Ute tribe, and this was more of the Timpanogos tribe tribal area. And so returning that to Lake Timpanogos would be, in my mind, a good thing. It would show a new chapter for the lake. We can get rid of some of the stigma, hopefully. And in speaking with Mary Meyer, she was very receptive to that and has some really interesting maps showing it as Lake Timpanogos.
That's great, thank you. The next question, if the island projects begin but fails, will developers face consequences or in any way be held accountable?
Well, I'll invite you to the next summit. We're going to be talking, having that project here. We're going to make the invitation to have that fleshed out, but we have to recognize one of the requirements in the EPA and the permitting process, and certainly as part of the legislation that we did this year, is requirement to have bonding in place. And there's whatever, and this could be with the lake solutions project, lake restoration solution project, or anything we do. There's significant criteria that's going to be in place, and we're going to make sure we have an obligation, all of us, to watch to make sure that it meets the scientific requirements, the data requirements, independent review, scientific review. We're doing best by this lake. So the question is there going to be punitive or criminal? Obviously we have a penal system. I wouldn't suggest that there's been any criminal activity done. And as I've talked to all sides, again, I think at this point there is a desire to make sure that we reach that best version of the lake. So there is probably, if there's a probability of failure, you're not going to move forward in that direction. I think we put the safeguards in place, and we should be in good shape there. Does that answer the question, Adam?
Thank you. The next question we have is, what can be done to change community perception of the lake and increase recreational usage?
I think number one, we need to make sure that people feel safe on the lake. There needs to be recreational areas that are attractive and easy to access. There are certain areas that are planned to have beachheads where they're going to be pulling in beach sand that's a little easier to use. People don't like feeling, deep mud under their feet or getting stuck in the mud that suction effect of having, if you've ever had stepped down into a lake and gone through the mud and then had the suction effect of not being able to pull yourself out, it's a scary thing. And so, you know, there's a few small things that we need to get people down to the lake and interacting with the lake. And they need to feel like it's healthy and safe to do so. And so, you know, these specific projects, I don't know, you know, I don't know that I can weigh those projects or imagine all of them. We'd love to hear your ideas, you know, and you should bring those to the Utah Lake Authority and bring ideas and bring plans. But, you know, sometimes there's an environmental view that people shouldn't interact with nature. And that's not a viable path with a lake that's this close to a population that's this big. It's simply not. We need to make sure, and the way that we get funding and the way that we make the lake healthy is by making people care about it. And that means they need to interact with the lake and they need to have a great time. And all of that starts with a positive recreational experience that feels good and feels safe.
Great, thank you.
I just chip in there real quick. I had an interesting dialogue with one of us, a member that the county came to me 18 months, well, about almost 2 years ago this July. So remember 2 years ago, I mean, we can continue in 2020, but 2021, in July, he said, I had the most wonderful experience playing and recreating on Utah Lake on July 24th. And part of it is we need to experience the lake and how we can learn how to appreciate it. We see these beautiful photos and the interactions take place and at all times you're fishing and recreational opportunities. But there is a real need as we look at recreation opportunities, we grow. Deer Creek or kind of our mountain lakes are full, and this can be a real blessing and help. And so we have a sailing club on the lake right now that loves to go sailing. And so I think I'm going to say it, just be candid. This harmful algal bloom, we've been working with this for years now in legislature, and we need to understand when it may be harmful, what it may not be, but we do have some very good, our Division Water Quality folks talk about this a little bit later, but we do have some good solutions in place to mitigate the algal bloom. So there's a few tweaks that we can make to I think, address Representative Brammer's perception, but it really is in some ways perceived worse than it is, but certainly there's a lot more that needs to be for us to fully utilize it clearly. So
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions now. I recognize we didn't get to a lot of questions that were on that list, but what I'd encourage you to do is reach out to these representatives. We will also have a little bit of a break later in the meeting. You're welcome to come continue to ask them questions. For being involved. Can we get one round of applause for our legislators for being here? Thank you, guys. I'd like to now invite Carolyn up to the front to introduce our next segment of the meeting.
Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn from Conserve Utah Valley. And the next segment of the meeting, so we've invited you here for I think about 2 hours. We're going to do the first segment of this next kind of educational piece. Will be about 30 minutes and then we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back for the next set of presentations. But I first wanted to kick us off by saying Conserve Utah Valley got really involved in this utility issue from about 8-9 months ago. And the main thing that we have learned along the way is how much there is still to learn. So there's so much happening in and around our valley and so much happening with our natural resources. And the lake is right at the center of it. And as a general public, and I would fall right into this camp, most of us haven't been paying attention. Like Representative Stratton said earlier, well, we're now awake. So I think that's good. That's a good move in the right direction. But one of the perhaps past false narratives that has been out into the kind of zeitgeist right now is that there's two options. Either do nothing and let the lake keep being what it is, or dramatically change the lake. And one of the things that we wanted to bring to tonight's meeting is actually to open up all of our understanding about what is happening on the lake. Because so much effort has been put into it over the last 20, 30 years, and especially in the last 10 years to improve the lake. We think it's really important to actually have a real understanding of what progress has been made and what progress is still to be made in these projects that are going. So we've invited several groups to join us tonight to help us understand some of the progress that's being made around the lake. So Representative Stratton's going to introduce the first group, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. We were going to have, I think we're going to call it audible. We were going to wait and do 30 minutes of quick Q&A at the end, but I think we've got about 5 presentations. I think it might get confusing with questions if we try and hold them all to the end. So we're going to do a short Q&A after each presentation, and we will be using the Slido again. So please don't interrupt our presenters with questions. We'll wait till the end of their presentations, and we'll also use the Slido to ask the questions of the presenters. So.
Thank you, Carolyn. Let me just give a quick reminder of how the executive branch works in the state of Utah. In our area of natural resources, we really have 3 main branches. Number one, we have our division, it's the Division of Natural Resources. That deals with anything except water environmental quality. So we have a Department of Environmental Quality with our Division of Natural Resources, and then the third area that we have that deals with this, we have an agricultural department that has some crossover into the work and needs of our natural resources. Within the Division of Natural Resources, we have several different divisions. One of those divisions, we're going to hear from a little bit later, that our state forests and sovereign lands. But this division we're hearing from now is in our Division of Environmental Quality. It's called the Division of Water Quality. And so we have, I'm glad to introduce today, Acting Director John McKay with the Division of Water Quality, and he's brought with him Scott Daly, Project Manager. And then we have some, back about 5 years ago, the legislature commissioned a science study on the lake. And we have several members of the science panel. Some are going to join in person and some virtually, but we have with us Greg Carline, PhD, BYU College of Physical and Mathematical Sciences, and also PhD, Science Panel Chair of the what is, I'll let him explain the acronym ULWQS. I think there's some quality in there, water in there, and science. That's a good acronym. So come on up if we can get those good panels to come up. And Carolyn, we'll turn them back to you. Thank you.
Just so you know who showed up. Hi, I'm John Mackey. I'm the interim director for the Division of Water Quality. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks also to sponsors, Representative Stratton, for inviting us here. We have a number of presentations that we would like to provide, mostly about, I think, the acronym ULWQS, Utah Water Quality Study, which is, in my mind, probably the most ambitious scientific study of any water body in Utah, which is focused on Utah Lake. We have a number of scientists, internationally recognized, all of the research universities are engaged. Many contractors are working together to try and sort through the complicated science that is Utah Lake. I don't want to spend too much time. Let me just introduce the group. We have 4 presentations. We'll start with Scott Daly, who's here. He's with the Division of Water Quality. He's our project manager. He's probably the most knowledgeable, organized person on the whole project. He's the one who herds all the cats, if you will. We also have, as Representative mentioned, we have Greg Carlin, who is going to present some information on the history of the lake. And then we have Dr. Mitch Hodgson, who's going to talk about, did I get that backwards? Mitch Hodgson, sorry, is going to talk about history. And Greg Carlin from BYU is going to talk about current state. And then Scott's going to wrap us up in presentations, looking at sort of the path forward. So to start, I'd like to hand it over to Scott.
Great, thank you, John. I have to admit, acronyms have never been my strong suit. Some people really have a gift in coming up with good acronyms, but that is not me. So you can blame it all on me. So Utah Lake Water Quality Study, we're going to talk about what it is, what we're trying to accomplish, the science behind the scenes, all of those things. The Division of Water Quality has been working on Utah Lake for 30 plus years or so. We're out there every month monitoring, collecting samples, evaluating that data, and for many years we've been tracking issues on the lake associated with elevated nutrient concentrations, harmful algal blooms, and many others. I mean, those aren't the only two water quality concerns that we're tracking on the lake. But for the purpose of the water quality study, nutrients are really front and center. So that's our goal with this water quality study. You know, the purpose is basically twofold. One, to understand the driving factors behind harmful algal blooms and what role nutrients play in them. And two, to identify any potential solutions for that problem. And is there something that can be done that leads to a healthier lake with respect to harmful algal blooms and nutrients? And so about 5 years ago or so, well, my math is off a little bit, 2015 is when the study started. And we organized a group of stakeholders and a group of scientists working with Utah Lake Commission and other local stakeholders to come up with this process to bring all of the interested parties to the table, to bring all of the scientists with the qualifications that are needed to understand Utah Lake to the table and work together in a science-based policy decision framework with the ultimate goal of passing information along to our policymakers to make those hard decisions for the lake. And again, the ultimate goal of improving conditions in the lake. And so on the graphic on the right here, basically the two most active components of the process are the science panel and the steering committee. The steering committee is an interest-based panel, 16 members. And I'll invite those that are on the steering committee to raise your hands. I know there are many in the room tonight. So Rich Nicholson represents wastewater treatment facilities. Eric Ellis is the co-chair along with the Division of Water Quality. Steve Gerard in the back. We'll be speaking later with the Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Resources. And I know there's probably some others that I'm not seeing here. And then we have a 10-member interest-based science panel, disciplinary-based science panel. And these are the folks that have the expertise to be able to understand the nutrient problem in Utah Lake. And I know I saw Theron Miller, raise your hand, back corner. So Theron's a member of the science panel. Greg Carlin will be speaking in a couple minutes. And then we also have online Mitch Hoxett, who will talk in a second, as well as Michael Brett and Hans Pearl. And then there are a few other members that aren't able to join us tonight. So with that, I'll just jump right into it. You know, what is the desired condition of Utah Lake? I mean, that's the question I think that's already been posed 2 or 3 times in our intro session tonight. You know, what do we want the lake to look like in the future for water quality? And, you know, the Division of Water Quality, we have our own definition of what we manage the lake for in terms of recreational uses, aquatic life uses, and agricultural. But they don't necessarily represent the local interest in what the lake should look like. So, you know, how do folks use the lake for swimming? What are their expectations when they swim in the lake? So the steering committee went through an exercise a couple years ago to put a little bit more specificity on what those look like, and describing the conditions that they prefer for recreation, for their aquatic life, for fishing, and for agricultural uses. And won't go into too much more detail, but invite you after the presentation to check out some of the resources related to these. So the science panel charge question, this is really a foundational document for the study. And to kick things off, the steering committee had 4 areas that they were interested in, for them to be able to make an informed policy decision down the road. And that is to understand where the lake has come from, what does it look like in the past, how has it changed over time, and how does that compare to today? So what is the current condition of the lake? Number 3, that's more the nuts and bolts of establishing criteria for setting standards in the lake, which is very policy oriented, mostly focused on the Division of Water Quality. And then really the question I think that everyone's really interested in is what can be done, right? What can we achieve with the current constraints that we have? We have constraints in the fishery, water management, population, how people interact with the lake, and all of those things. So what are the potential solutions that we can see down the road? And so to evaluate those charge questions, the science panel set to work. They compiled a whole lot of information from existing studies, and I'll tell you, there are countless research programs that have occurred throughout the decades in all of our local universities. Science panel compiled all of that information, tried to distill it down into what was available to answer those questions, and then identified a series of knowledge gaps, and then focused a research program around trying to understand what those gaps look like, and commissioned a number of studies to help fill those gaps. And this list here is only, well, it's most of them, but not all of them. There are several that are, most of which are commissioned by the science panel themselves, and then a number of others that are being conducted by partners to the study and other local organizations. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mitch here in a second, but last fall was an opportunity for the science panel to kind of really check in on their progress towards and being able to answer those questions. And some of the studies have been finished, many are well underway, some are just starting, but we have enough information to start trying to see where we're at and make any corrections or adjustments so that we can answer those questions down the road. And so what Mitch and what Greg will be talking about here in a second is really the science panel's interim assessment of the information that we have with respect to those charge questions. And we'll focus first on the historical condition of the lake, and then Greg will touch on some of the information with the current conditions. And in a couple-minute presentation, there is an overwhelming amount of information to talk about. And so we're just going to give you a quick snapshot and maybe invite you to check out some of the other things online afterwards or ask questions following. So with that, Mitch, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Scott. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Mitch, we can hear you just fine.
Perfect. All right, could you please go to our first slide? All right, so as we start this off, let's just kind of talk about some of the key events that have happened in the recent history of Utah Lake. So starting back in 1849, we've had the settlement, or I guess the Anglo-Saxon settlement of the Utah County. In 1883, carp was introduced. Around that time, in 1872, the Utah Lake Outlet Dam was constructed. So when we see this fish symbol, kind of think of that as there's carp, and we also increase the surface water elevation by 3.3 feet as compared to the original outlet elevation of the Utah Lake. Then we had the Dust Bowl in 1935 that resulted in ultra low water levels. And then in 1950, that's when the first wastewater treatment plants began coming online in Provo and around the lake. Prior to that, wastewater, directly entered the lake or, canals, etc. The Clean Water Act happened in 1972, and that's more akin to the wastewater treatment we see in the valley at the moment. All right, this plot on the right, this is just showing the population growth that has happened in the valley. And you can see it's really started taking off around 1960. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the questions asked is, do we find evidence for regime shift? And by regime shift, the function of the of Utah Lake. So just as we talk about these different plots and whatnot, I want to make it very apparent that, when I talk about Utah Lake, I visualize it as Utah Lake proper, the main body of the lake. There's Provo Bay, and that, has its own unique water source of Hobble Bay and has less toll dissolved solids and has a different sediment type. And then we also have Goshen Bay, which is linked to Utah Lake, but it has more salty water, higher TDS. So, when I visualize Utah Lake, it's three different places. All right, so this first evidence of a regime shift, this is a sediment core taken in Goshen Bay. And what we'll notice around 25 centimeters, there was a shift from hardstump bulrush, which was found in sediment cores, to predominantly cyanobacteria in the community composition. So this was a very apparent regime shift. And we'll talk about this later on, but it kind of occurs around the same time carp was introduced and we had dammed up the lake. Next slide, please. All right, so, we've got a line of evidence, the community changed. So what does this mean? So now we're going to look at the plankton, so the things in the water column. So so this core was from Goshen Bay also, and it's been dated with the little icons, with the fish and the wastewater treatment to identify the depths in the sediment column at which these events occurred. So, for example, there's been 40 centimeters of sedimentation since settlement in Goshen Bay, and there's been 25 centimeters of sedimentation in Bird Island. It changes throughout the lake in different places. But the take-home message here is notice, the increase in cyanobacteria across the board, and also the increase in green algae that's present in the historical record of the sediments. So this is just telling us that we have more of these pollution tolerant plankton in our sediments since over the past couple of 100 years. Next slide, please. All right, so another thing we can look at is diatoms. Diatoms are pretty cool because they have a silica shell. So as they're deposited into the sediments, you can literally look at them underneath a microscope and identify what these things are. So the far left is epiphytes. That's a fancy word for plant dwelling. And then, so we notice there's been a decrease in epiphytes. So one would assume if there's less epiphytes, maybe there was less plants for them to live on. And then we also see a decrease in the next plot over of the sand dwelling or the benthic diatoms. So something happened that makes the environment was less productive for these sand dwelling diatoms. And then we also start to see an increase in the pollution tolerant diatoms and the planktonic. So those are the ones that are floating around in the water column. So that, once again, another line of evidence showing that we have had a change in the community composition. Next slide, please. Okay, similar, the Goshen Bay diatoms, won't spend too much time on this, but we see the same trend across the lake where you see an increase in the pollution tolerant and a decrease in the clear water species. Next slide, please. All right, so you just picking a nutrient, phosphorus here. So, and this is a sediment core from Provo Bay. So once again, I want to be very clear that it is well known that Provo Bay and Utah Lake proper have different sediment compositions. But as we're looking in here, you'll notice, so the first plot on the far left, exchangeable P. So that is basically pore water P and loosely bound. So if you disturb the sediments, you'd get a release of this phosphorus. We see an increase since 1882 to current times of about twice as much, going from 12 milligrams per kilogram up to around 20. Okay, kind of interesting. Now we go over to the next one, iron and manganese bound phosphorus. And we notice a massive increase from 100 milligrams per dry kilogram up to 400 or 500 milligrams per kilogram in recent times. So the concern here with iron manganese bound phosphorus, these are the ones that if the water column goes anaerobic, so that means there's no dissolved oxygen, this stuff will come out of the sediments. Okay, so that's the concern with the iron and manganese bound. So the next one over, we've got organic. So if stuff grows, it dies. And if it dies, it settles to the bottom and accumulates. So we've seen a significant, a twice increase in organic matter in the top 20 centimeters of the sediment column, implying that we just have more stuff growing and dying and accumulating. Then we go over the next one, calcium carbonate-based phosphorus. You can also, around 25 centimeters, a massive increase, from 250 milligrams per kilogram to up to almost 600. And this is one of the primary, methods of natural phosphorus removal in the lake is just this calcium carbonate precipitation. So I guess the take-home message here is this study and throughout the lake, we are observing increases in sediment accumulation of nutrients across the board, indicating that there have been increased loads to the lake. Next slide, please. Looks like we got that one. All right, so to sum this all up, the lake has changed from industrial times to present day. It has changed from an oligomesotrophic state to its current state of eutrophic. It has become nutrient enriched. In terms of macrophytes, there was evidence of clear water submerged species. They were not everywhere across the lake. And I wish I had this slide, but there was a map done in 1852. So before the dam was built, where it literally shows on the map, it says short reeds down in Goshen Bay, and then it has a gigantic wetland in Provo Bay. So I don't know where I was going with. What I was going with was we found evidence of the macrophytes along the shoreline, but has not been observed in the middle of the lake, agreeing also with this survey from 1852, where it describes the center of the lake as a white clay. In terms of diatoms, we have clear evidence that we have switched from, diatoms that lived on vegetation and lived on the bottom to now pollution tolerant and planktonic, so they're floating in the water column, diatoms. And then we have cyanobacteria and green algae. They're ubiquitous in the environment, but we have too much of them in Utah Lake and it's creating problems. And this is shown throughout the sediment record. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mitch. Next up, we'll have Greg talk about our second charge question in current conditions, and we'll focus on kind of watershed nutrient conditions and the sediment record.
All right, thanks, Scott. Okay, so I've been asked to speak about some of the current data that we've collected over the last several years with the science panel, but also before that. First thing is there's a lot of questions about where did the harmful algal blooms occur? And so when we say harmful algal blooms, this also means cyanobacteria. So these are kind of two names for the same thing. As you can see from this map, we tend to get, so we have these harmful algal blooms across the lake. You can see them all over different times of the summer. But in particular, we see the highest cell abundance, these cyanobacteria cell abundance in Provo Bay. They tend to occur most frequently on the east side of the lake, also up in the kind of in the northeast corner. So these hotspots tend to occur in areas where we have high nutrient loading, and by nutrients we mean mostly nitrogen and phosphorus. That's what we're talking. And so these areas where we have nitrogen and phosphorus inputs, we tend to get the higher occurrence of HABs or harmful algal blooms. Okay, but the harmful algal blooms, it's not just a simple case of add nitrogen and phosphorus, get more harmful algal blooms, but sometimes it depends which nutrient you're adding. In some cases, We see adding nitrogen causes these blooms to occur. Other cases, it's phosphorus. In some cases, it's we call a co-limitation, where it's nitrogen and phosphorus could be limiting. So there's a study done by Dr. Andrew at BYU, where they took water samples from different parts of the lake, and they put them in these little cubitaners, and then they spiked them with different nutrients, and then they measured what the response happened. And so these are separated from the phosphorus. It's just looking at the water column. But this chart up here shows in the top part shows cyanobacteria, or the harmful algae. Different parts of the lake, different times of year, show different responses to nitrogen and phosphorus. So it's a pretty complex thing. Down here with total phytoplankton, which not necessarily the harmful things, but also they could cause changes to water clarity and could be a nuisance in that regard. These also show, in some cases, no limitation. There's already enough nutrients there. They're not limited. In other cases, a lot of the times it's nitrogen and phosphorus limited. Okay, the science panel and through our study, we also wanted to know what are the main watershed sources of these nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus. And so the best estimate is that there is about 180 tons of phosphorus inputs to the lake each year, and about 1,600 tons of total nitrogen. And this study looked at inputs from rivers and streams, which includes all the urban sources that drain into those rivers and streams, groundwater, atmospheric deposition. So of these, there's still uncertainty, and we're still debating atmospheric deposition, but these are the best numbers we have so far. And so I also want to point out that we have some of the highest loads here in the urban area, as you'd expect. So people create nitrogen and phosphorus, ends up in the wastewater, ends up in the lake. But these point sources have improved greatly. So over the last, especially over the last decade, a lot of the nitrogen and phosphorus removal has been improved. And so this is a constantly ongoing, constant improvements in nutrient inputs from the urban area. And so this is, a lot of the stuff we're presenting is still ongoing. So there's still a lot of work going on with the science panel and people working on funded projects through the science panel. But we're still working on trying to improve the resolution of this, like the spatial resolution, making sure we get all the sources, temporal resolution, making sure we capture storm events or flooding events, that sort of thing. And I also mentioned improving estimates of atmospheric deposition of nutrients. And then also trying to decrease nitrogen and phosphorus inputs to the lake. Okay, and one thing we also know is that there's a lot of, as Mitch alluded to, there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus stored in sediments in the lake. And so this recycling of nutrients from the sediment into the water column is important. And so this map over here shows phosphorus concentrations in sediment across the lake. And just want to point out that the lake sediment naturally has pretty high phosphorus concentrations. The geology of the watershed, a lot of the limestone around us contains phosphorus that washes into the lake naturally. And so you can see the colors here correspond to phosphorus concentrations. And so yellows and greens are kind of maybe moderate concentrations, maybe represent some kind of a background. But we also see areas with pretty high concentrations. So over in Provo Bay and the reddish orange colors over here, areas along the east side of the lake, also areas in Goshen Bay, we have pretty high phosphorus concentrations, which indicates additional sources that have been added to the lake and that also show up over time in the sediment cores. And so these areas of high phosphorus also correspond to areas of urban inputs of phosphorus. And so this phosphorus is there, it can be recycled back to the lake water. But we can't really think of this as an additional source. It's not the same as adding nutrients from outside the lake into the lake. It's stuff that's already there. It undergoes a short-term cycle. It might end up leaving the sediment, get into the water column. It might get used by cyanobacteria or the algae, but it's going to quickly return to the sediments. So overall, the sediments are very good at removing nutrients out of the lake. So that's one of the amazing things about Utah Lake and the unique chemistry of the lake is even though we've been dumping all sorts of nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients into the lake for the last 150 years, the lake is extremely good at removing that for us. It's like free nutrient removal. And so in fact, about 90% of incoming end up getting sequestered or tied up or locked up in the sediments. Okay. Some of that, like I mentioned, is bioavailable. In other words, it can return and be used in a short-term cycle before it ends up back in the sediment. It's a very short-lived process. But a couple of things we want to know as a science panel, which is ongoing. Will reducing these watershed sources of nutrients help with the cycling? So if we reduce external inputs, is that going to reduce the internal cycling as well? And then the big question is, how long would we take if we're able to reduce these external nutrient loads? Okay, so just to summarize my little part of this, so we know that we have harmful algal blooms or these cyanobacteria blooms occurring lake-wide, but we tend to have hotspots in parts of the lake like Provo Bay, and these blooms are limited in some cases by nitrogen, other cases by phosphorus or both. We have watershed nutrient sources, a lot from the urban area. Some improvements are already being made, and we have ongoing studies to improve this. And then sediment recycling is also important, but overall the sediments are net sink or are removing a lot of the nutrients that we put into the lake.
Thank you. Okay, just in the last couple slides to summarize, I mean, there's still many pieces of science coming in. Barry mentioned atmospheric deposition. There are several other paleo sediment studies that will inform the work that Mitch talked about. There's additional sediment studies that are being conducted now to help inform the lake recovery, the binding of phosphorus, removal of phosphorus, and all of those things. And so, with all of that information, though, then the question is, what can you do with it? How does it inform the lake recovery? What kinds of mitigation efforts, if any, can you employ? And so kind of a separate component of this whole thing, everything that we talked about is focused on determining what a healthy lake looks like. And there's a third component or a second component that is, well, how do we get there if we determine that there's some progress that can be made? And so the steering committee just recently started an effort this past year or so to develop a strategy to incorporate all of the information that we're learning. One, to identify potential mitigation strategies, determine how effective they would be at recovering the lake, how long it would take, that recovery time that Greg mentioned, how much it would cost. That's obviously a really big part of the equation. Is it feasible to do these strategies? And we're talking everything from watershed reductions, improvements to stormwater, or improvements to agricultural landscape, improvements to point source discharges. But we're also talking about potential in-lake mitigation strategies. Is there some kind of treatment that can further remove nutrients from the water column? Is there some ecological mitigation strategy, planting of macrophytes, carp removal? All of those things are important considerations here. And so the steering committee and science panel will be evaluating how effective those types of things will be over the next couple of years, and what kind of bang for buck you get with those, and how much is needed. So that's just the process that is starting right now. And we'll continue on through the next little while. Just to close out with a timeline, all of the stuff that we talked about, the sciencey stuff, is part of phase 2, where we're establishing, trying to figure out what the healthy lake looks like. And then the implementation stuff, what can be done, how long will it take, is in the green box here, the implementation part of it. And so we're now, just moving into the implementation phase. Hope to wrap up our criteria development part of it by the end of 2023. And then a similar timeline for the implementation planning. And then after that, hopefully we can have some solid recommendations to start putting things on the ground and making improvements in the lake. Okay. And then thank you. With that, there'll be a link. I don't know if it's quite visible here, but we have a website dedicated to everything Utah Lake Water Quality Study. And there's a huge list of resources. All of the interim assessment of the charge questions we talked about is there. And of course, reach out to me if you would like to participate or observe and contribute to the process. So, thanks.
We can come back to a couple questions. So, like I said, we'll just take a few questions that came into the slide on this presentation. And just so everybody's aware, we have, after the break, we're going to have a presentation on the June sucker. We're going to have a presentation on fragmite control and hoping to talk about nutrient reduction strategies, as well as the Provo River Delta restoration and snowpack. So the questions that came in regarding those things, we're going to save for those presentations. But there are a couple that are very related to the things you guys talked about. So first, this is a good one. This is talking about the phosphorus and the natural one. So I think Greg that you mentioned. It says if the mountains area around us are naturally rich in phosphorus, how effective would mitigation be with all of those, those things continuously putting more phosphorus in the lake?
Yeah, so I mean, there is a pretty high kind of background concentration for phosphorus, but as you can see from some of these studies where the water with nitrogen and phosphorus, you get additional growth in some cases. So I think like dealing with that additional nitrogen and phosphorus really could improve things. But there's always going to be, I mean, Hans Pearl is on the Zoom call. He'd be a good one to chime in with that as well.
Do we have Hans? I just want to say that a follow-up to this.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to double up on what Greg said. I think, any effort to reduce phosphorus will ultimately help wean the lake of phosphorus and keep it mostly in the sediments. But nitrogen is really important too, particularly if you consider that nitrogen leaves the lake easier than phosphorus does. So if we start reducing nitrogen, it will become a more limiting nutrient that will reduce the overall, growth potential for the algae. So that's one reason why we're heading towards kind of a dual nutrient recommendation for the lake.
Okay. One more question. So snowmelt runoff forecast suggests that the input to the lake this summer will be below normal. Are harmful algal blooms therefore more likely? Who wants to take that one? Hans, do you mind taking that one too?
I couldn't hear the question.
Okay, if so the snowmelt is predicted to forecasted to be less than normal this year. Does that make harmful algal blooms more likely?
What was the first part of the question? If what?
The snowpack is lower than normal or expected to be.
Yeah.
If the runoff is lower than normal, does that make algal blooms more likely?
Well, there are several factors that affect algal blooms. Certainly, if less nutrients are coming into the lake, the potential for a bloom is lower, but also other issues come into play. including drought and which could lead to longer residence time of the water in the lake. And that would just mean, that the internal cycling could be enhanced too. So, like every scientific question, it's like a double-ended coin, right? So this all really comes down to the nutrient reduction strategy, because we can't manage the climate, but we can manage the nutrients that come in. And, the lake is too big to manage the hydrology or the flow, the actual water that flushes through the lake. So, climate changes are creating a complex situation, but we know that dry, long residence time conditions do favor cyanobacterial blooms, as long as there's enough nutrients available.
Okay. Well, thank you for a good answer to a complex question. All right, so last question for this group, and then we'll move into a break. This is a great question about the impact of carp. It says, what percentage of the algal blooms can be attributed to the carp population? And if we were able to successfully remove more carp, would that improve the bloom? We think Mitch should take this one. Mitch, are you up for it? Or Mike Mills?
Yeah, I'll take a shot. So I had trouble hearing too. So if we add more carp, will it improve the lake? Was that the question? Or if we remove more carp?
Yeah, sorry, I'm hoping that the computer might be picking me up too. So the question was, if carp are related to the algal blooms, how related are they, or what percentage of blooms could be attributed to it? And so if that is the case, if we removed more carp, would that affect the blooms?
That's a darn good question. I mean, carps, they're annoying. They're everywhere. We've been trying to eradicate them. We know they muck the place up. We know they eat submerged vegetation, but they also, there's feedbacks going on. I mean, we know wind is a major driver of turbidity, which is water clarity. So more turbid, less light gets in, there's less potential energy for algal growth. So I think I can't answer your question. We don't want them there. They're not helping us, but I can't give you a percentage.
And it is a known gap, and it's something the science panel has been discussing. There's so far not a lot of evidence that we have to be able to specifically answer it. We know the carp do churn out the sediments a certain amount. We know that nutrients are consumed by the carp. They pass through the carp and come back into the water column and could potentially stimulate algal growth. We have actually quantified how much is being cycled through carp and are able to compare that with the rest of the food web, some other ongoing work. But it certainly is an issue, and there's more information to be gathered on it.
Next science committee meeting, we need to know how much we can pin on the carp, okay, guys? So thank you so much for helping us out with this panel. For the more than 100 of you who are here in the room, thank you for coming. 10-minute break, and for those on the live stream, we'll be pausing for 10 minutes and coming back. And I just as a heads up, our next speaker will be Chris Kelleher on the Gene Sucker Recovery Program. Guys, at the back of the room, there are some tables, information tables, that we would love for you to take a look at.
think I got it. Okay, we're gonna get started again. If everybody could take a seat, and if Chris Kelleher could make his way up. Hi, Chris. We've got one person who's gonna do one. Okay, so right before we get into Chris's presentation, I have two little things I want to point out. One, there is a magazine in the back, if you didn't see it, probably tell like, this is an
Either way, if you want to like
Craig
watch
standing
it,
back there waving
just the air, and there's
right
like
in the
a
back. If you
laser
haven't seen
pointer.
this, this is a really great production from the Utah
that you can use, or if you
Museum.
just want to.
And they're in the back, beautiful work here and a lot of good learning. And we also have another group who's at a table. Here you guys go.
Hi, my name is David Lindsay. I'm the director of a nonprofit arts organization, and we oversee this platform for site-specific video. And what that means is that we're able to allow artists mostly to exhibit videos wherever they want. And of course, these videos have to do with the places that they're exhibited in. So we've started this project now called Honor Utah Lake. And it's what we'd call a crowdsourcing project, where we want people to talk about their experiences of Utah Lake. What are the joys that you found in Utah Lake? Where are those beautiful places that you'd like to go, or things that you've seen? We'll collect these stories, and then we'll essentially make the bay, the perimeter of Utah Lake, into an exhibition of all of these stories, so that people can essentially go to these locations and you can be standing there next to them, telling them about why the lake is beautiful, why it's important, why it needs to be saved, why it needs to be improved. And so if you've heard of the StoryCorps project, it's similar to that, only we're taking these stories and we're actually going to put them around the lake so that people can access them where they're going to have the most impact.
Yeah, so as we've been talking about, one of the most, like the biggest tasks that we have in kind of change the narrative of the lake, change it, help people see it with a positive perspective. And I think as we talk to individuals, we see that, right? Most people have a positive experience with the lake, but they don't get to hear about it. So our idea is to collect the science that you're doing, the art that you're doing, the recreation that's happening, the history that has like that we have in our neighborhoods, put it all together, and then when people come to the lake, they can go to the Lincoln Marina and then see, oh, there's a bird watcher that is recommending all these sites close by. Oh, there's this artist that picked this specific location for photographs because of this and this and this. So our big request right now is if you have any stories that you want to tell the world, we'll be out there. We have a booth and we have a little QR code where you can have your information. You can fill out your information. We'll contact you and we'll interview you. You can share your pictures, posters, whatever you need to share, and we'll put it on our big map. That will be kind of like this geocaching app. But if you don't have a story, you have friends that have stories. If you have like, so we can get more stories and people can get connected to the lake in a happy way.
Thank you.
The June Supper recovery, and don't forget, slide is open. We'll take 2 questions after Chris's presentation.
Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, my name's Chris Kelleher. I am the June Sucker Recovery Program Director. And I'll just be given a brief history of the June Sucker Program tonight. If you were here in August, you saw a very similar presentation. And I won't use that. Oops. Maybe it did. It's just slow, huh? Okay, just a brief timeline. Back in 1889, noted ichthyologist David Starr Jordan visited Utah Lake. He was the first fisheries scientist to visit the lake, and he called it the greatest sucker pond in the universe. by 1986, June sucker were listed as endangered less than 100 years later. In a book, Battle Against Extinction, that was published in 1991, Gary Scopatoni, a Northern fisheries scientist, said June suckers are precariously near extinction. They remain only as a rapidly shrinking and aging remnant population without recent successful reproduction. And then when I was a field biologist in the 1990s, I was able to conduct a population estimate on the remaining fish in the lake, and we had less than 300 June sucker in the lake in 1998. Moving right along, what was the problem? Well, we had, as you can see here, this is a life cycle diagram of June sucker. And we had adult fish in the lake. They'd come into the Provo River. They primarily spawn in the Provo River. They spawn successfully, and we get yolk sac larvae coming out of the system. You can see how vulnerable these fish are on the head of the, or on the backside of the penny there, tail of the penny. But these yolk sac larvae never reach the feeding stage. And so we only had this remnant population of aged adults. And these fish were all over 40 years old, very close to extinction. And that was our imminent threat. So how do we go about avoiding extinction? Well, the June sucker program was formed in 2002. This is a state, federal, and local partnership to recover the June sucker. And this year represents our 20th anniversary, and we've come a long ways. The June sucker program had two goals: one, to recover June sucker so that they no longer needed the protection of the Endangered Species Act. We wanted to do this while we allowed for continued water use and development for the human population in the area. And the program wasn't only intended to offset the impacts of water development, but it's really intended to recover the June sucker. So our first task was to avoid extinction. We took those old adults that we had in the river, and we spawned them along the banks of the Provo River and took the fertilized eggs up to our hatchery in Logan. And it took a lot of work to figure out how to raise these fish. Our first progeny were all deformed and really in bad shape. We had to figure out the diet for these fish. But we started stocking them out as juveniles, and they grew and survived in the lake, came back into our spawning run and reproduced. We still had this gap here though, this red area where the young fish just weren't surviving. But we felt like at that point we averted extinction and could really start focusing on recovering this species. So the June sucker program is very scientifically based. We knew very little about this species when we got into the program, and that's the way it is with a lot of endangered species. Once you get to the point where they're endangered, you don't have a lot of basic information on their life history and what they need. And we really focused early on a lot of research to guide the efforts of the program. We do this in an adaptive management process where as we gain new information, we incorporate it into our on-the-ground recovery actions, and we monitor the response to those actions and incorporate that information as we move along. One of the first things we did was develop some flow targets for the lower Provo River. Before the June sucker program was in place, the Provo River would go dry often during the spawning run, and we were losing some of these few adult fish in the lower river when it would dry up. So one of the first tasks was to start acquiring water specifically for June sucker. And this graphic here I put up just to demonstrate what the flows in 2021 would have been like without June sucker in the lower Provo River. The green part of this graph represents June sucker water that was purchased to recover this fish. And if that water wasn't provided and wasn't there, you can see the lower Provo River would be dry from about April through September. So when people ask what good is an endangered species, well, it's a lot of good for the community having water in the river. We also, whoops, too far again. We also had to look at restoring some habitat for these young life stages of fish. And we targeted Hobble Creek after looking at all the tributaries to Utah Lake as one place where we might be able to restore some habitat complexity. And the reason for the habitat complexity, the reason for that is the young fish would be able to avoid predation. And then as well with the
Sorry, I'm just sharing the screen.
Yeah. You good? Yep. Okay, so we looked at Hobble Creek as a place that was feasible to do some restoration work. And we acquired this 21-acre piece of ag land down there, and working with UTA as mitigation for their front runner line, we did this restoration work down there and turned the Hobble Creek out of its channel and ran it through this ag land and created these conditions that we felt were what the young life stages needed. And we documented here overwinter survival for the first time with this species, which was a big deal for the program. We finally got recruitment back into the system. This Hobble Creek project was really a pilot project for a bigger project that's underway right now. And I won't steal Mike Mills' thunder because he's going to give a presentation on this shortly. In terms of the non-native fish component out in Utah Lake, we recognized that we had an issue out there. And we took a look at all of the fish species out there and determined that carp were the biggest issue for Utah Lake and June sucker recovery. And this is a quote from the United States Fish Commissioner back in 1901. And he said, the carp, which had thriven immensely, have eaten off the mosses and similar growth along the bottom of the lake, so that the trout had not had enough to eat. We looked at the carp population and did some research on the feasibility of controlling the population out there. So these fish were introduced in the 1880s as a supplement. And our research said that mechanical control was feasible. Now, this was back in 2005. We had a population out there of 7.5 million age 2 and over common carp, averaging about 6 pounds apiece. And I calculated that if you placed all those fish nose to tail, they'd stretch from here to Cleveland, Ohio. That is a lot of biomass out there in the lake. So what do carp do? Well, they do contribute to simplifying the ecological system of the lake. They take out the vegetation, which really acts as cover for small fish and balances out predator-prey dynamics so that the small fish can grow, and then the predators get bigger fish so they don't have to eat as many. But it's just like hide and seek out there in the lake when there's plants. But what you get with carp, or what they contribute to, is a very monotonous system where it's dominated by algae, midges up here. This is a midge hatch on Utah Lake, and common carp. So we initiated a large-scale carp removal effort in 2009 with the target to remove 75% of the biomass out there. And we achieved that target in 2018. That target was based on scientific literature that said with a reduction of 75%, we'd start seeing some ecosystem changes in the lake. There are other compounding factors there that we're still working to deal with, but we did start seeing some plants come back into the system that we were trying to do. One of the issues is a challenge to maintain the carp population at those low levels. When you reduce the population up here on the upper left, you reduce the population, they create more offspring because there's less competition in the system. We've also found that the carp have higher reproductive years in the higher lake years because the lake gets into that inundated vegetation around the lake, and those young carp can avoid predation and just do better. And the removal gear, we've been using just big commercial beach seines to remove these big fish, and that's not effective for the smaller fish. So we're investigating options on how to control these early life stages to help with that, maintaining the population at lower levels. So this has just been a brief summary, but with all those efforts, what's the response we've seen? Well, I mentioned back in the 90s, we had a spawning population of 300 fish. Today, we've got 32 to 50,000 adult fish spawning in the Provo River. That's in February last year, the species was downlisted from endangered to threatened, and we're well on our path to recovery and delisting. But we recognize that June sucker is what's called a conservation reliant species, and even once it's delisted, we're still going to have to continue to do a lot of the management actions that we've been doing to get it to this point. So some of the important points, the program serves as ESA compliance for water development, which is really important with the Central Utah Project and all the water use we have here on the Wasatch Front. The program's made significant investments in Utah Lake and the recovery of June sucker, and we've seen some benefits associated with that. Had our recent downlisting, as I mentioned, and we're on the track to recovery and delisting with the recognition that ongoing management will be required after delisting. So that's the presentation I have for today, and we got some contact information there if anybody wants to follow up anytime with me on anything.
It's a really good question that came in on the Slido. So from Riley, what is the midsummer distribution of the adult June suckers in the lake? Do they concentrate or are they widely dispersed now?
We've found June sucker all across the lake, but they do travel together a lot of times, and there are locations that they prefer. There's an area called Long Bar off the north side of Provo Bay that they really like to frequent. It's a sandbar, and the reason it's a sandbar is it's a depositional area in the lake, and we think that June sucker maybe are attracted there because it's a good place to feed and that sort of thing. So we see a lot of them there, but they do use the entire lake.
Thank you so much. One more round of applause for Chris. Okay, our next presentation is going to be about the Phragmite removal and some other habitat restoration efforts around the Utah Sovereign Lands. And we're going to have Director Jamie Barnes, and Keith Hambrecht from the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. Oh, there you guys are. I'm not sure where our other mic went. No, we just did one. Okay, I'll just give a quick introduction and Keith can take over. Well, good evening. Thanks for joining us here tonight and thanks for having us. I'm Jamie Barnes, Director for Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So first of all, thanks for caring about Utah Lake. Utah Lake is really important to our division and all that it does for our ecosystem and just natural resources in general. So our division is the executive management authority for sovereign lands. And as we've talked about here tonight, Utah Lake is sovereign lands. So what that means is we work with an array of stakeholders with regard to permitting, activities on the lake, projects that go on the lake. And when the legislators were up here talking about funding, we're usually the division that funding gets put through to get things done on the lake. So there's a lot that I could sit up here and talk about everything that we do, but I really would like Keith to share some of the awesome things that have been done out on the lake in connection with other stakeholders, with the county, with the Utah Lake Commission. We work closely with all those agencies. We can't do it alone. So it takes an army to, get this resource to get done what needs to be done. So it's a group effort to do it, but I'll turn the time over to Keith and let him share some of the things that have been done out there with regards to restoration and Phragmites.
Thank you, Jamie. So as Jamie mentioned, I'm Keith Hambrecht, and I'm the invasive species coordinator for the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. I'm going to give you a rundown on Phragmites control on Utah Lake. So first off, what is Phragmites? Phragmites is a tall wetland grass, grows up to 12 feet tall. It forms dense monocultures, and its non-native invasive form, is highly invasive. It's taken over wetlands all across North America. I think it's important to note that a native subspecies does exist in Utah that has been around for a long time. It's still present on Utah Lake. It looks exactly like the non-native form. And I think this led to an insidious takeover of our wetlands here in Utah, because most of the wetland managers, they were used to seeing Phragmites around, and they were unaware that it was this non-native form that was taking over. And so, as Jamie mentioned, the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands is tasked with managing sovereign lands. And sovereign lands are the beds of navigable waterways in the state, which include Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, and Jordan River. All of these water bodies were heavily invaded with Phragmites in the early 2000s. And I was hired by the division in 2016 to tackle this issue. So why do we want to control Phragmites? And of course, I'm referring to the non-native invasive form. It is destructive to habitat, specifically bird habitat. It causes a reduction in biodiversity, significantly alters hydrology as well as sediment transport, and will decrease water availability for other uses. It's important to note that regarding recreation, the waterfowl hunting and birding communities that really spoke up for action to be taken on invasive Phragmites. So, in other words, Phragmites turns wetlands into cornfields. So this picture on the left shows me standing in a field of alkali bulrush. This is in Great Salt Lake wetlands. As you can see, it's probably about 6 to 12 inches tall. It's pretty sparse, and there's still a lot of open water. And it's these mixed areas of vegetation and open water that are heavily used by birds. And then this picture on the right is also me. No, actually, that's Chad Craney from Division of Wildlife Resources. He's 6'5". So clearly illustrating 12-foot tall Phragmites, impenetrable, dense, huge monocultures. And unfortunately, this is what happened to a lot of our wetlands in the early 2000s. And so what does Phragmites control and restoration look like? It's actually a pretty simple process, but we've learned that the details are complicated and the details are really important. Simply put, we know we need both chemical and mechanical treatments, and these details have been thoroughly researched. And here we're really, really lucky to have local research. I'm incredibly grateful for the work out of Dr. Keven's Wetland Ecology Lab at USU. She's had students look at what drove the invasion of Phragmites, how we can control it, and then what to do after we've controlled Phragmites in revegetating our wetlands. And me and a few other managers worked with her team mostly over the past 6 years to develop these best management practices. And so we're taking their research and put it into practical, straightforward guides on how to deal with Phragmites. And so with that research guiding us, we put together treatment protocols for different areas, and we can tailor them to different areas. This is what it would look like for Utah Lake. It's a bit more simple actually than Great Salt Lake wetlands. But for Utah Lake, we know that we need to spray herbicide at the end of the growing season. And it needs to be done before Phragmites goes dormant for the season. But it also needs to happen before it is drought stressed. So we need healthy Phragmites to effectively kill it with herbicide. It has an incredibly dense root system and rhizome mat that takes a well-timed herbicide treatment to kill it. And after we spray, about 30 days or more later, we mow and trample. Mowing is often done with a flail mower, and then trampling is done with basically just a giant metal roller that pushes down and crushes the biomass. The purpose of this stage is to break down that Phragmites biomass, that massive amount of biomass, but also to allow light to penetrate to the soil surface. And that will hopefully allow for the habitat restoration piece and allow for other plants to germinate. So we know that this process needs to be repeated for, in most wetlands, about 3 years. So it takes three rounds of these treatments to fully kill Phragmites. And these are, as a guide, about 10% cover for this phase 1 of removal. We know we get about 10% cover, and then so we see the rhizome mat starting to break down. We know we're ready to hopefully move on to another area. And then from there, we can move on to the second phase, which is just mostly maintenance and monitoring. And maintenance would entail spot spraying of any Phragmites that comes in, and monitoring for revegetation needs. And so who's involved with Phragmites control in Utah Lake? As Jamie mentioned, it's a huge collaborative effort. We're really grateful to have the Utah County Weed Control Department spearhead the effort. They started this effort in 2012, but they're often the ones on the ground. They have 2 large Marshmaster tractors that are out there doing a lot of the mowing and trampling. They're helping to coordinate the effort on the ground. In the future, these Marshmasters will be doing spot spraying. For forestry fire and state awareness, I write the project scopes for the large contracts that we have for spraying, mowing, and trampling, and revegetation. I also act as a research liaison with that USC lab, as I mentioned before, and I do monitoring and also provide funding for the effort. Utah State University has been heavily involved with the research. The Utah Lake Commission has helped with grant funding, and they also get landowner permissions for any work that's done on private land. Then there's also some folks in wildlife that are on the ground, also on Utah Lake, managing habitat and controlling Phragmites. And then a lot of the funding, in addition to the forestry, fire, and state lands funding, has come from the invasive species mitigation funding through the Department of Agriculture, and then the watershed restoration initiative, which is in the Department of Natural Resources. And so some history of the Utah Lake project. It started in 2012 with Utah County, as I mentioned, and then efforts were really ramped up in 2016. And it was in 2017 that the approach that was taken was adjusted thanks to guidance from USU research. And so prior, the way the treatments were going was they were just working their way around the circumference of the lake, treating an area once, moving on to the next area, treating an area, moving on to the next, working their way around the lake. But the research told us that we knew that we needed to stick to one area for 3 years or more to make sure we fully killed the roots and rhizomes. And so from there, the approach was adjusted to focus areas versus contingency areas. And those focus areas where time and money were invested in treating the same area multiple years in a row until we saw that 10% cover. And so 10,500 acres have been worked on. So it's the entire lake shore. And from 2016 to 2020, these large-scale efforts were guided by best practices through USU research, as we mentioned, and we're seeing huge success. So just a visual of the effort. This shows a cumulative map of all the treatments that are taking place on Utah Lake, and you can see the entire lake shore has been treated. And so what are we seeing? I'm really happy to report we have a 70% reduction in Phragmites cover around the lake. And on the North Shore, it's probably even higher than that. This map illustrates that reduction. The dark red is showing the extent of Phragmites in 2012, and then that light green is the Phragmites extent in 2020. And really, you can see a lot of areas, all that's left is just some Phragmites right up against the shoreline, which are often the hardest areas to treat. And so what does that look like? Here's some aerial imagery from the North Shore of Utah Lake. And in 2011, you can see the vegetation in there. It's all Phragmites. And then in 2020, it's all been removed. And even that vegetation you can see in the 2020 photo is some cottonwood and almond trees. So here's some more photos. Before and after photos, just kind of showing how the lake is opened back up before and after. Here's some more of bay being opened back up. And so these photos are showing opening up of the lake and exposing open water. But how's the vegetation responding? And even there, I'm happy to report, we're seeing native recruitment of vegetation. So we haven't actually had to do active revegetation. This is an area along Saratoga Springs. There's almost no Phragmites in this photo, with the exception of on the far left, that little ribbon that you can kind of see in the map that I showed earlier. But the vegetation here is a really mixed composition of rushes, sedges, and fords. You can see there's these little pools of open water, maybe some bare ground. We have diversity and it's low-lying vegetation. Here's another photo on the North Shore, a bit different soil type. And no Phragmites. And so where do we go from here? I think we just need to continue our protocol. We figured it out. It seems as though it's working really well for us. And we're hoping that as we reduce more acreage, we'll be able to work into the contingency areas, and then we'll see a further reduction in Phragmites. And we know that we need to keep monitoring and establish revegetation best management practices. So the monitoring we know is important. We won't eradicate Phragmites. There's too much of it in our system. And then we want to have established revegetation practices as we observe how these plant communities evolve over time. And another important piece that we're really working on, having for a while, is remote sensing. We're hoping to use remote sensing to map Phragmites with aerial imagery. And this will allow us to do that long-term monitoring and rapidly respond to any areas that get re-invaded. And that's all I have. I encourage everyone to use this QR code to check out our story map on our website that also shares the story. Thank you.
So we've got about 15 questions about fragments. And because we still have 4 presentations to get through, I'm going to keep it to 1. I think this one's really interesting. Somebody said, I noticed they burned the Phragmites at Great Salt Lake State Park. And maybe that was you, but
I wish it was me.
Okay. But how does fire compare to the other Phragmite treatments?
That's a really good question. I didn't include prescribed fire in this presentation, but prescribed fire is one of the best methods to remove the biomass of Phragmites. Often we'll see a more quick response of Phragmites after these burns happen. So initially when you look at it, it looks like it's not helpful because you see a ton of Phragmites really big. But I think really it just accelerates that process of killing the roots and rhizome and cycling through the seed bank. So it'll accelerate that process of getting back to the soil surface. One interesting note about prescribed fire, do you think that if I work in just in forestry, fire instant lands, and fire is a fantastic tool for removing Phragmites, you think I would be burning a ton of Phragmites? I've burned some Phragmites, but not a ton. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to get air quality permits for burning because of our air quality issues. And in order to get those burn approvals, it has to take place on the day of the burn. So you have to gather all your resources. You show up and you call and you need the right conditions to get the green light to burn. And with all of our fire resources being strapped, dedicated towards fire suppression, it's hard to get them out there with a strong possibility that you're just going to get shut down.
Well, for all of us who care about our air quality, thanks for taking precautions on that. Questions. We actually have the ability to export all the questions that came in through Slido, and Nathan, Isabella, and I are going to take the task to take all these questions back to our experts, get answers, and share them back with you through our social channels and through our email list. So rest assured, if you ask a question that we didn't have time for during the presentations, we will get back with answers on that. Okay, next, you're welcome. Next presentation is going to be Richard Nicholson from the Timpanogos Special Services District about nutrient reduction strategies.
You have the video, right? Okay, good.
So I knew we only had 10 minutes, so I had a video prepared. I'm going to have that played, and then after I'll say enough to fill in the rest of my 10 minutes. I only had 5 days to prep this, so by the way, so.
Sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
With a surface area of 150 square miles, Utah Lake is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the western United States. Utah Lake has played a key role in agriculture and the economic development of northern Utah during the past 150 years. Here are some of the past key actions and management decisions regarding Utah Lake. Overharvested native fishes, introduced carp, diverted water, built sewage treatment plants. What is TSSD? TSSD stands for Timpanogos Special Service District. We clean the sewer water for over 250,000 people in our growing community in northern Utah County. We remove greater than 98% of the primary pollutants and process about 1 pound per day of biosolids for each person, which is 250,000 pounds every day. There are 7 other treatment plants that flow into Utah Lake. Together, these plants clean water for about 650,000 people. That number is forecasted to grow to 1.3 million in the next 20 years. These plants are publicly owned treatment works, or POTWs. POTWs in Utah collaborated with the Utah Division of Water Quality, or UDWQ, and Utah legislators to set a reasonable and attainable level of discharging no more than 1 part per million phosphorus into Utah Lake. This resulted in a new Utah law, or rule, in 2015. The rule, along with expansion for growth, will take 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars for full implementation. All the treatment plants on Utah Lake will be in compliance by 2025, after which a thorough review of the impact of the lower standards, or in other words, a return on investment study, should be conducted. By incorporating new processes, TSSD achieved this standard in 2020 and currently removes over 80% of the phosphorus that comes into the plant. Calculations show that at the current growth rate, with these processes in place, the 2070 population will discharge the same amount of phosphorus to the lake as was measured in the 2015 population. This buys us time to do research, and we are doing the research. Now, the Utah Division of Water Quality, or UDWQ, is collaborating with the Utah Lake Authority to set even lower site-specific nutrient standards for Utah Lake. Their work is known as the Utah Lake Water Quality Study, or ULWQS. Will these levels achieve a cleaner lake? How will clean be measured? How clean is clean enough, and can it be achieved? There is a perception that cyanobacteria blooms in Utah Lake are getting worse. This is a graph of the algal blooms from 1995 to 2018. While there may be a perception that the algal blooms are increasing, this UDWQ data shows that the line is flat, or in other words, there is no growth trend or discernible increase. Safety warnings have been issued and the lake shut down multiple times in recent years because of harmful algal blooms. What is causing these blooms? One thought is that they are caused by high amounts of nutrients in the lake, and that lowering nutrient levels, particularly phosphorus, will solve the problem. Will lowering nutrient levels decrease cyanobacteria? In 1934, Alfred Redfield published a paper about his data and analysis of marine biomass, which he collected during several voyages to oceans around the world. He found a remarkably constant ratio in the elemental composition of marine organic matter. The atomic ratios of phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon were the same in all matter he tested, whether living or dead. The discovery was named after him as the Redfield ratio. The ratio is here simplified to P to N to C equals 1 to 10 to 100. Since nitrogen and phosphorus are considered the most limiting to plant life, it is thought that by limiting one of the elements in water bodies, such as phosphorus, will reduce or eliminate the growth of phytoplankton, which is all the green stuff in Utah Lake. Cyanobacteria, a type of phytoplankton, come in all different sizes and some produce toxins. Directly testing for toxins is a good measurement for determining the toxin level in Utah Lake. The excessive nutrients in Utah Lake come from multiple sources, including sediment resuspension, surface runoff, air deposition, and discharged water from treatment plants. Let's take a closer look at those four primary sources. Sediment resuspension. It is estimated that Utah Lake has 1,500 tons per year of phosphorus released into the water column from lake sediment. Wind and wave action in the lake constantly mixes things up. That mixing is referred to as sediment resuspension and makes phosphorus available for algal growth. We are studying carp mixing, ecology sediment stabilizing, and the ability of Utah to sequester the suspended phosphorus and make it unavailable for algae food. Surface runoff. The surface of the earth throughout Utah Lake's watershed used to be the lake bed for Lake Bonneville. It is rich in phosphorus. Precipitation causes surface runoff, which brings a continuous flow of phosphorus into the lake. The Wasatch Front Water Quality Council, which is a collection of POTWs, has been collecting data on this since 2014. Last year, 42 tons of phosphorus entered Utah Lake from surface runoff coming from tributaries. Air deposition. Solid particles. When these airborne particles are washed through snow or rainfall or fall as dust into the lake, this is referred to as air deposition. Air deposition can be observed in two ways: high air deposition or local air deposition. High air deposition can come from faraway places such as West Coast fires or even from other continents. Local air deposition comes from windblown sands and local pollution. Sometimes air deposition makes the news. On February 5th, 2021, residents in Utah County noticed large amounts of brown snow covering everything. This is air deposition. One nice thing about precipitation is that it cleanses the air. The downside is that the air is often filled with things we don't want in our water, such as pollutants and excessive minerals. This memorable one-day event brought 5 tons of phosphorus into the lake. The Wasatch Front Water Quality Council has sponsored research since 2017 to measure as much as 77 to 430 tons per year of phosphorus entering Utah Lake through air deposition, treatment plants, or POTWs. This table shows the phosphorus load to Utah Lake by treatment plants on Utah Lake in 2021 and projected loads after 2025. Treatment plants on Utah Lake contributed 124 tons of phosphorus in 2021. By 2025, it will be about 53 tons per year. This represents a fraction of the total phosphorus in the lake. All this up. The lake has about 870,000 acre-feet of water with 0.07 milligrams per liter of phosphorus. That multiplies out to about 82 tons of phosphorus. In 2021, sediment resuspension, 1,500 tons. Surface runoff, 42 tons. Air deposition averaged 254 tons. And treatment plants contributed 124 tons. That is a total of over 2,000 tons of phosphorus in Utah Lake. Phytoplankton are indifferent about the source of their nutrients. If we remove the nutrients from just one source, treated sewer water, will it change how the lake functions? The 2015 rule reduced phosphorus coming from POTWs by 80%. We need a cost-benefit analysis to see how the hundreds of millions of dollars invested by POTWs help the lake. Did lowering phosphorus coming from treatment plants translate to fewer algal blooms? Limno Corral study. Last year, we commenced a study titled A Sustainable Approach for Limiting Harmful Algal Blooms in Utah Lake. We generally call it the Limno Corral study. Here is a summary of the long-term holistic solutions we are probing in the research. Deep water, binding all phosphorus. Here we are sequestering the phosphorus so that it is not available as food for algae. Lake mixing. Here we are assessing mixing impact and correlating it to carp mixing, wind, and how turbidity may inhibit life in the waterfall. Carp and nutrients. Here we are assessing the presence of carp, nutrients, and their effects on water quality. Subaquatic vegetation and carp. Here we are assessing the effects of carp, nutrients, and vegetation. Aquatic vegetation and June suckers. Here we are assessing the effects of June suckers, nutrients, and vegetation. Shallow water, aquatic vegetation. Here we are evaluating the vegetation to stabilize the lake bed, sediment, substrate, and regulate nutrients. Mollusks. Here we are assessing the stabilizing effect of the presence of mollusks and their contribution to filtering and cleaning the water. Mollusks and vegetation. Here we are assessing the effects of mollusks and vegetation combined to synergistically restore the lake's ecosystem function and maintain and improve water quality. Carp interaction. Carp interaction with subaquatic vegetation, including juvenile carp recruitment. In summary, phosphorus coming from your clean sewer water will be reduced by 80%. This buys us time to do research. TSSD's research will play a critical role in shaping future standards to be established by UDWQ. POTWs will design and construct the system upgrades needed to comply to new standards. Research and evaluation of the 2015 rule needs to be conducted to see how the hundreds of millions of dollars invested by POTWs helped Utah Lake.
So that's pretty much what we're doing, wrapped up, and I think Representative Stratton, he asked me, what can we do to do something on the lake? And I happen to just finish a year-long study that takes a look at what we put together, those limno corrals. And basically, we will put a target on those carp to see how much they're doing. That's what this research will do, but we don't have those answers yet. It's going to take some time to collect that information. So, questions?
Since nutrient recycling from sediments added by far the most phosphorus, would dredging the lake really be a viable solution?
In theory, yes. Could be.
That was a fast one. Let me ask you another one. Cyanobacteria require more nitrogen. Is there a rule for reducing nitrogen? Nitrogen limitation of cyanobacteria growth seems easier to achieve.
I don't know how they, well,
That's what I do, is to treat your sewer water. If you put it in a lagoon, it takes about 30 days or 45, and we do it in about 18 hours. So the answer of doing that with removing nitrogen through ammonia, if you understand all that, yes, that does work. But like we said on the Redfield number, everybody keeps dancing around that, and I kind of simplified it to be 1, 10, and 100, because you can remember that. That's not the real ratios they are just a little bit different. So everybody keeps going to phosphorus. If we can control phosphorus, then we can do it. But from the other presentations that under Scott's direction there, they're saying that nitrogen as well is a limitation factor. So what was the question again? Oh, is there a law or a rule on nitrogen? And the answer is no. If you take a cost analysis on the phosphorus, a scenario or a rule of thumb, it's $1 for phosphorus, nitrogen is $10. So I don't know if it's cheaper or easier. It's definitely not cheaper because you've got to get rid of 10 times more. Remember, the ratio is 1 to 10 to 100. So if I want to get rid of the carbon, it's going to be another 10 times on top of that. Ballpark. But you've got to do the engineering, which we're doing. So cost is going to be 10 times more than the phosphorus. So just if cost is not an issue, just give me another $100 million, and I'll actually 140. That's the 2020 dollars, and so now that's probably up to $300,000, and I can do nitrogen and remove more nitrogen. So
I like your map.
simple.
Thank you so much for joining us. The next presentation is about the Provo River Delta project, and we have Mike Mills, who is the mitigation, or from the Mitigation Commission, joining us.
Right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and be presenting. I got a little stressed as I was sitting back there and the blinds started to lower, because one of the advantages of this room is you can look out towards the lake, and unfortunately now it's a little too dark, but you could see the area where we're conducting the Provo River Restoration Project. So as the blinds were closing, it's like, no. And then it raised them back up. So prayer works, just so you know. But seriously, if you look out towards the lake, you can see the jetties from Utah Lake State Park out there. And just to the north of those jetties, between us and the jetties, back on the land is where this Provo River Delta Restoration Project is taking place. So like was mentioned, I come from the Mitigation Commission, which is our shortened name. We're a small federal agency based out of Salt Lake City. And we do a variety of projects all over kind of north central Utah as mitigation for water development projects and to the environment. In the case of the Provo River Delta project, I kind of illustrated where it's located. Let's see here. This doesn't help you that are online, but Provo High School, if you're familiar, Lake State Park, and this is Center Street that runs from I-15 out towards the state park. And then Provo City Airport would be located to the south of this, kind of off of this map. What this project does is it restores about a 260-acre delta. It restores the active connection between the Provo River and Utah Lake. As part of the project, we'll also be including some recreational improvements down in the area. We'll be building a city park that long-term will be managed by Provo City. It will be located right in here. We will keep a small amount of water that will continue to flow down the current river channel. There'll be a small dam constructed on the river down at Utah Lake State Park. And so the current river channel will then become kind of a long pond that will be managed at a set elevation. So it can be more of an amenity for the trail that runs along the river and also allow us to monitor and keep high quality water in this area down here. There'll be a trail that comes up and parallels the southern boundary of the project. A couple of trailheads, a non-motorized boating access point here, a viewing tower here, and all of this is happening. You're probably wondering, why are they doing all this? If you think back to Chris Kelleher's presentation, this project is part of the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. We, the Mitigation Commission, we serve as the lead agency on this project, but we work very closely with Central Utah Water Conservancy District and also the Central Utah Project Completion Act Office of the Department of Interior. And then this whole effort is wrapped up in the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program that Chris spoke about earlier. So the primary purpose of this project is to provide habitat for those little larval suckers that Chris showed on the back of that penny. In the current river channel, and even though we have thousands of June sucker that should be coming up there to spawn in the next couple of weeks, and they produce millions and millions of larval fish, in the current river channel, those larval fish don't have the opportunity to survive. And so this project would provide those habitat conditions to give them a chance to survive, to become feeding larvae and then feederlings and then eventually adults that would return again to spawn in the Provo River. Also, as part of this project, I mentioned the recreational benefits, and we also adopted a flow regime for the lower Provo River. Chris Kelleher mentioned this, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense for us to build this delta if we didn't have water to help support it. And so a big part of the June Sucker Recovery Program is securing the water necessary in order to keep the lower Provo River flowing. And this all circles back to the connection that Chris pointed out, that we have to do these projects to make progress towards recovery in order for the program to continue to supply that compliance with the Endangered Species Act. So it kind of all works together to make all of these projects a positive thing, not only for June Sucker, but for people who recreate down on Utah Lake and all of the critters that rely on that ecosystem. So this project got started back in March of 2020. At the same time that COVID really kind of took over our lives. Despite that, we were able to proceed with construction, and the first month we built an access road, and boy, were we excited. We had a ribbon cutting event planned, got canceled because of COVID. We had all sorts of fun things that we were hoping to do to kick off this project because it was a long time in the making. We had our first public meetings about this project back in 2010. And it took us all the way until 2015 just to get to a point where we had finalized the NEPA analysis for this project. And then another 5 years in order to acquire the land and work out the other environmental permitting in order for the project to proceed. So we were pretty excited to be able to start in 2020. We made some pretty good progress the first year. You can see this picture here shows some of the recently excavated ponds that we had after a year down there on site. And then in 2022, we had even more progress that had been made. And then there are the excavated ponds. Over the course of a year in one growing season, you go down here and look at this area. It's very productive. It looks like it's been there forever. It's exciting to see this progress come along, and just point out this picture. This is Rocky Mountain bee flower. My son has been stung by bees so many times. He recognizes this flower and won't go anywhere near it. if you're down there at the right time of summer, it's just swarming with bees around it. There's some maps to show what the project looked like when we got started. So this was all open fields, primarily used as pasture land for grazing cattle down there. This area out here, this is called Skipper Bay Dike. It was constructed in the 1920s in order to keep Utah Lake from coming in and inundating this area that's known as Skipper Bay. Even with the dike in place, there were many years that farmers would have to pump water over this dike in order to keep this land dry enough for their agricultural purposes. So historically, this really served as a bay of Utah Lake. November 2020, so approximately 8 months after we had started construction, we had been able to dig a few of the channels and then a lot of work on these ponds that become features of the delta when it's finished. If we jump ahead to November of 2021, you can see that all of the network of channels and ponds are really starting to take shape. And these pictures don't really do justice of the revegetation effort that's part of this project. Paula Traders in the works for our agency, and she's one of the many hands that have been down there to plant. I believe it's over 70,000 plants that have been planted down on this site over the roughly 2-year construction period, and there's more to come. That doesn't include the reseeding efforts, all of the efforts to control invasive species that could invade this area. It really is more than just going out there and digging. There's a big science to it and a big revegetation effort that is part of the project. So if you look at this is kind of our plan for 2022 and the construction that needed to take place. One of the things we did very early on this year, recognizing our snowpack being the low condition that it was, we went ahead and went out and dug these outlet channels out into Utah Lake. One of the last things we'll do as part of the project, I say last, but it will actually happen here in the next few months, is we'll go in and lower Skipper Bay Dike, and then where we've dug these outlet channels, that area will be even lower. And what that will do is when Utah Lake fills again and comes up to the compromised elevation, it will come in and inundate this area and provide some of the dynamic processes that would have been present in a historic delta. And then the water will be able to move back as the level of Utah Lake varies down there. Right now, a big focus is building this riverine section. Out in this area, a lot of the process has been digging, revegetation. When you're building river channels and these types of sediments, it's a much more involved system where we have to construct riverbanks. Have a picture later that shows a little bit of that process, that it requires a lot of manpower and a pretty skilled effort in order to build those river channels. Delta Gateway Park, I mentioned this at the start. This is land that we were able to acquire as part of the project that didn't really need for the Delta itself. But it will provide an opportunity for us to build a park down there and then give that to Provo City to manage going forward. And Provo City actually came up with the name of the park. And so we were pretty excited when they agreed. Area, a playground, kind of a launching point, because there's going to be so many trails that come in to this area as kind of a junction point. The current Provo River Trail, you could take off from this point and go all the way to Deer Creek Reservoir. You can head north. Provo City's working on the Lakeview Parkway right now that will eventually include a trail. Go south or go west out to Utah Lake State Park, or what I think will become known as the Delta Loop, head out along the south boundary of the Provo River Delta and then loop around using the current Provo River channel. We think this will be a great amenity for the public down there. this trail here that currently exists on the south part of Skipper Bay Dike, that will remain intact in order for that loop to be completed. If everything goes to plan, we'll be able to divert the river out into the delta in hopefully November, sometime late fall to early winter is when we hope to make that change and actually release water out into the delta area. At that point, we'll go in and build a small dam or start construction on the small dam. And then we have planned a few recreational improvements along the existing Provo River also. Just some pictures of the construction process. The main trailhead for the project will become known as Skipper Bay Trailhead. There'll be a non-motorized boat launch. And so this area, this track that we've been digging will be kind of an access channel where people can come up, put canoes or kayaks, paddle boards into the water and be able to move access the delta area. These are images of those outlet channels to the west of Skipper Bay Dike that become important features for June Sucker to be able to access the delta area. You can see we've come in and hardened them with some rocks in order to kind of key them into place. In other areas where similar restoration projects have been done, this has been an area where there's been some failures and fish haven't been able to access the restored area. So we're hoping that that extra armoring will help those channels stay in place. These are the start of the riverine channels, and then this is coconut fiber. It kind of looks like rolls of saw, but it's actually coconut fiber that we brought in, and you kind of make these dirt burritos out of the coconut fiber and line those up along the river channels in order to build up the banks that will eventually fill in with vegetation and become the new channel for the Provo River. If you have any desire to know more about the project, we have a great project website, Provo River Delta US. We host tours every second Saturday of the month. You can sign up. Paula is a great tour guide, and if you're extra ambitious, she'll even put you to work down there, helping with some of the revegetation and noxious weed control. We've really started to reach out and have involvement from Provo High School, university groups, elementary schools that are getting involved in some of the work down on the project. You can sign up for our project newsletter. We send that out twice a year just with updates on the project and what's happening. But one of the big efforts, we started this last year, that there's concern that this is going to be a big change for all the people who use the Provo River currently. And so we've been trying to go out and meet with users one-on-one and tell them that this change is coming, so that a year from now, when the Provo River has been moved to the north, that they will have expected that and know what's going on. We started that last year, but again, will be a big focus as we move into this summer. And just to point out some of the other restoration projects that our agency and the June Sucker program have been involved in. This is over on Hollow Creek. Chris Kelleher mentioned this project, but this was really to restore the connection. This is I-50, and then the airplanes flying over Provo Bay to take this picture. This was kind of the impetus for the Provo River Delta project, because this one worked. It gave us hope and the momentum to move forward on the Provo River, in although a much larger effort. And this is upstream on Hollow Creek. This project is adjacent to a community park in Springville, where we restored the river in order to provide more spawning habitat for June Sucker. Just some other examples of similar restoration work that we've done. And I'll go ahead and wrap up there. And if you can find a good question, I mean, you found great ones for Rich, so yeah.
Okay. several questions, but the one I'm gonna ask you is this: is the delta being formed in the historical channel of the Provo River, or is it a complete diversion? And will there be horse trails?
Okay. Good questions. Let me take the mic back. So as we researched and made the plans for the Delta, some of that work was looking at old maps, but also some geological work to find out what the historic Delta of the river looked like. And the active floodplain where our project is being implemented was probably the very north end of what was the historic Delta for the Provo River. And it probably extended all the way down past where Provo City Airport is today and down into Provo Bay. Some of the old maps show multiple channels going down through that area. And if you look at the sediments down there, it's very indicative that there used to be a river delta that has spanned that whole area. It probably wasn't all active at one time, but we're restoring a portion of that historic delta. And then in terms of horse trails, the trail that will go along the southern boundary of the project, it will be paved on the top of a berm that will be in place in order to protect the properties to the south. And then down on the side of the berm will be a much more narrow dirt trail that is designed for equestrian use. As we went through our public meetings, that was one of the issues that the local landowners were very passionate about and wanted a place to be able to ride their horses. We even have designs for manure bins at trailheads. So I don't know if they're going to make it into the final versions, but we're thinking about it.
I feel like that's a lot different than me with the doggy bag.
Yeah.
Okay. So our last presentation of the night is going to be about, I'm very excited about this one. It's about snowpack hydrological conditions and stream flow forecasts. I know we're all concerned about the drought. And so we've got Emily Fife and Jordan Clayton who are joining us from NRCS to talk about that issue. Oh, here we go.
How's that? Can you hear me all right? Okay, thank you very much for having me as part of this meeting. My name is Jordan Clayton. I'm the supervisor of Utah Snow Survey. My boss Emily can't be here this evening, but I'm happy to give this presentation for NRCS. And I'll be talking about the current snowpack conditions in this basin, in this area in particular, what we're anticipating in terms of our runoff forecast, and we have some updated numbers as of this morning for that. So let me jump right in. As a little bit of background, I work for the NRCS, which is a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Our mission is to provide stream flow forecast based on our snowpack. And of course, we do this by measuring the snowpack at a variety of locations around the state. We have 137 SNOTEL sites in the state, and I'll explain what those are in just a second here. Why does this matter? You may or may not be aware that about 95% or more of the water that we use in Utah comes from snow, and it comes from our winter precipitation. And that's particularly true in this portion of the state. So we obviously are quite concerned with being able to quantify how much water is stored up there. Our SNOTEL system is an automatic series of weather stations that measures the snow water equivalent, the snow depth, and a variety of other parameters that we can use to then forecast what we're going to get when all that water comes out of the snowpack and ends up downstream. And so, as I mentioned, we have 137 of these SNOTEL sites in the state of Utah, and a really large number of these across the West. And our office in particular manages those sites in Utah and also has jurisdiction over the sites in Nevada and the area around Lake Tahoe. So how are things doing right now? This is a map as of Utah, and you can see they're colored by what percent normal they are for this time of year. Now, a word of caution, as we get into this portion of the snowpack year, as we're melting more and more of the snowpack off, these percent normal numbers become a little bit less meaningful because we're comparing against very low numbers at this time of year. When we get into our peak snowpack conditions around April 1st, these numbers are more meaningful. As we get into lower and lower normals, if you will, the percent of normal numbers start to become a little bit more meaningless, but I still want to be able to provide some context. So these are the percent normal values for the basins across the state. And you can also see the individual SNOTEL sites that I was just describing are those little dots on the map. They're also coloring scheme. So let's zoom into the area of interest. And we're looking now at the watershed where we're sitting right now. And the dots that are behind me are also the individual snow-tell sites that are colored, as I mentioned, by what percent normal they are as of last night. As you can see, for this time of year, we have a large number of our sites that are below 50% of normal. A large fraction of them that aren't are between 50 and 70% of normal for this time of year. So our snowpack is not where we want it to be. We've had a variety of very inspiring talks this evening, and I apologize that I'm not going to be delivering great news, but I will do my best to keep this as positive as I can. We have had a roller coaster winter throughout the state, and that's no different for this basin. This takes you through a calendar of this particular water year, which started in October and it continues to right now. Starting at the bottom left and moving over this sort of rainbow arch to the bottom right. We started off in excellent condition in October, then things really dried out in November, and then we had December, which made us all feel very optimistic that we were going to finally get this big above normal snowpack here that we've been waiting for. Unfortunately, January and February really dried out, and March and April have been just so-so. So we're right around that 50 to 70% of normal range in that bottom right picture, which is that orange color. Shown in the middle of the screen is the overall picture for this particular basin that combines the American Fork, Spanish Fork, Provo, all those into one number. And the current water year is shown at the black line. Behind that is the percentiles, so it gives you the full range of observations that we've seen. And then you can also compare that to normal by looking at the green line. So you can see our current water year relative to what would be considered normal snowpack for the various times of year. Now, if we zoom into our basin SWE, or snow water equivalent, and that's the key parameter that we're looking at. The SWE is again the water equivalent in the snowpack. That's the water that's going to turn, that's going to fill our reservoirs. It's going to turn into stream water. Our peak was around 14.3 inches for the basin. That occurred about a week and a half early for the 2022 water year. And it was about 79% of normal. And so that's a little disappointing. It was again, quite a bit higher back in December, but we'll unfortunately have to deal with this lower percentage. If we compare that to last year, we can see the peak SWE was a little bit higher last year than it was this year, which is disappointing. For this particular year, there are some other things that were going on last year, particularly soil moisture levels that were historically dry last year that had really profound impact on our runoff, and we're not seeing things like that this year, so I'll come back to that in just a second. So our overall water supply conditions aren't exactly the same as last year, but unfortunately our snowpack did not perform as we had hoped. Jumping into our subbasins, the subbasin coloring is the same. You can see for the American Fork, the Provo, and the Spanish Fork, the coloring scheme for, again, the snowpack as of last night. And the Spanish Fork doing the worst of the three, but none of the three subbasins where we want them to be. This is for Spanish Fork. You can see we peaked at about 80% of normal. I'm going to move through these kind of quickly because I know we're towards the end of our time, so I'll try to be quick. Our peak SWE for the Spanish Fork, a little bit higher last year. Similar for the American Fork, 76% of normal. Quite similar to last year. And for the Provo, around 82% of normal. And just slightly different than last year for the Provo as well. A little bit of a different picture when we look at precipitation totals. Precipitation totals count everything that's been received at our snow-tell sites from October 1st until the present. And so that's all the liquid moisture, that's all the solid snow that we've received at our sites. And so the benefits that we received in October and December are still causing these numbers to be high. Obviously, we've gotten some precipitation since then, but these numbers are pretty close to normal for this time of year. They're just a little bit below. And we're hopeful that this is going to help with our runoff. It's not the same as having snowpack up there, but it's still helpful. Reservoirs. We wanted to also talk about reservoirs. This particular slide shows the reservoirs for this area. And you can see the three reservoirs. Instead of turning around, let me just do this. The three reservoirs, of course, are Utah Lake, Deer Creek, and Jordanelle. Deer Creek's holding a lot of water, but Jordanelle, if you've driven by it recently, you've already become familiar with how low that is. And Utah Lake's about half full. You can't see it because it's behind the little zoom stuff up at the top, but this is percent of capacity on the slide. This is now mapped by percent of normal. So Deer Creek is right around where it is normally for this time of year. Jordan is below, as is Utah Lake. Okay, I mentioned soil moisture. This is a graph of soil moisture for the entire basin, looking at all those sub-watersheds combined. And again, the black line here is the current water year. The green is the average for these different times of year. And you can see we're significantly above normal for this time of year, which is encouraging. That's going to help promote a better runoff than we had last year from our snowpack. And so we are hopeful, based on the current soil moisture condition, that at least the amount of snow that we're measuring up the mountain, we'll at least get a larger percentage of that than we did last year. For context, last year is that red line at the bottom. We were setting new historic lows all through last winter based on the really conditions we had in the mountains. It started to rebound a little bit last spring, but as you can see, we've trended much better this year from a soil moisture perspective. So that's positive. These graphs are from the U.S. Geological Survey. They show for the Spanish Fork in the bottom left, the Provo in the bottom right, and the American Fork in the top right, how the stream flow is doing. They use a similar scheme to us. So the black line is the current water year, and you can see the percentiles. So the Spanish Fork and the Provo are in that green. They're kind of close to normal for this time of year. The American Fork in the top right is well below normal for this time of year. Okay, I think we probably are most interested in this slide, although there's a lot of numbers up here. This is the anticipated May 1st stream flow forecast. These are preliminary numbers. I use these without permission from my forecast team, so please bear with me. They're probably not going to be exactly the same as this, but they won't be much different based on the conversations I've had since I put this together this morning. These will be published later this week in our water supply outlet reports that are coming out. But the general point here is for the forecast points of interest for this group, we're looking at the second column that I highlighted there, which is percent of normal, percent of median. And these are the runoff totals, the volumes that we're anticipating for those different forecast points, either for the April through July period or the May through July period, depending on which one you're interested in. And you can see how those compare to normal runoff for those overall April through July periods. Again, we're going to have an updated set of numbers in our water supply outlet reports coming out later this week, if not tomorrow. We use a stream flow forecast, of course, for all the basins in the state. If you want to access these in a map format or in charts, you just go to our webpage. You can find the information there. Again, in maps, charts, anything you want. If you have questions about it, just please reach out to us. And then finally, we combine our current reservoir storage with our runoff to get an overall volume of water that we expect to be available for different basins across the state. So again, you're looking at a volume of water that's currently there in the reservoirs and a volume of water that you're expecting to get from the stream flow generated from your snowpack. You put them together and you have an overall water supply value that you can compare against previous years. And then you can get an index for how well you're doing based on, again, that 30-year window that you're comparing against. I put an arrow by the Provo. The Provo is in the bottom 10th percentile for the period of time we've been evaluating this, which is about 30, 35 years. So we're really concerned based on, again, current reservoir levels and how low our stream flow forecasts are for this area. We're very concerned about the overall surface water supply conditions for the Provo, as well as many other basins in the state. These are those that are to speak. To compare this to last year, we have the April 1st from this year on the left side and the April 1st from last year on the right side. And you can see the relative change from last year for different basins across the state. Unfortunately, Provo pops out as one of the ones that's really hurting compared to last year. And so most of it has to do with reservoir depletions because our runoff forecasts are similar. Again, we'll be providing all the information I'm talking about in our water supply outlet reports. It's one of the many monthly reports that we put out. We also have climate and water reports that focus a little bit more on our scan sites and other sort of soil information. Those come out also monthly throughout the year. Hope I didn't go too fast. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I think probably everybody's ready to go home.
I think all of the media outlets have left. So I don't think anyone's going to leak your unapproved numbers. Okay, so the quick question, do we have a sense of what percentage of the overall snowpack comes from lake effect off of Utah Lake?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have a rough idea for what percentage of the snow that we receive in the Cottonwood drainages comes from Great Salt Lake, but I don't have that information for Utah Lake. And I would love to know if people know have an insight on that. I would be very interested to hear that. For the Great Salt Lake and the Cottonwoods, it's about 10 to 12% of the overall snow budget for sort of an average snow year. I don't have an estimate for Utah Lake, but I'd be very interested to know.
Okay, well, that's your task for next summer. All right, thank you so much to all of our scientists. I appreciate that, all of us care a lot about Utah Lake, but these are the folks who are spending, honestly, their whole lives working on Utah Lake, and we really appreciate that. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Representative Stratton to close us out for the night.
One of the things we want to accomplish tonight is give a sense, and because of the recording, and create a record of the things that are being done. And I appreciate all the men here. At the beginning, I said, we really have over probably 1,000 years of experience. Don't you think I underestimated that? Remarkable information, very, very helpful in what we're trying to be and the direction we're going. You never can chart a good course unless you know where you've been and where you are. So let's thank all our presenters and look forward to our next summit. Stay tuned. We're in a wonderful process that we'll continue. We're committed to that. Appreciate all those that are interested. And one thing I know, I really feel strongly about it, we all want that very best version. And we're going to get there. We will get there. Thank you so much.
Yeah.